All right, welcome to the Save the Universe podcast number 40. Bird's gone again, but this time instead of a gravestone of Bird in the corner, we now have Colonel RPG again.
Yep, it's your favorite resident Portuguese ex-archaeological role-playing aficionado let's player with beard. Did I say the beard part?
Did we talk about that before?
No, I don't think we have.
Did we ever talk about you being, like, what, you said ex-archaeological?
Kind of, yeah. I have a major degree on archaeology.
I don't know if we ever discussed that last time.
So both you and Keith got sick of the earth and ground-based things, and you
Yes.
decided to make your living as video game people.
Yes.
Instead of digging up the history of the world, we're digging up the history of fake worlds that somebody else wrote.
It's just as important.
And our only
I stand
reward
by
is
that.
plot holes.
Hey now.
Yeah.
Keep
There's
digging
more than
until
just
the
plot
world
holes.
crumbles and then the actual logic falls apart and you've broken the dimensions with your brain.
It's all relative. One of the things that you learn in archaeology is just to see things that are not there, and so you learn to think about a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense at first, and then never makes any sense. So it's the same thing with video games, really. When you look at a plot and don't make sense of it, it's just all relative.
Archaeology is like fan theories in real life.
Yeah, I very much stand by that. Actually, I think I made a video about deconstructing game worlds in ways that are not immediately obvious. That's one of the reasons I really enjoy the Dark Souls world. I'm playing through it actually on stream, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. I thought we had talked about that though.
I don't remember. It's been long enough that it's hard to...
Yeah.
Enough time has passed. It's been like 20 episodes, and we don't even record every week consistently. So that would be...
Yeah, unfortunately.
Like
I do enjoy your
6 months, probably.
I do enjoy your podcast, and thank you for having me back. Thank you very much.
I try to get somebody in whenever we're missing someone, but I don't always know until we're already starting.
It's impossible to plan. Yeah, our usual schedule for this is Saturday rolls around, and either we are totally silent up until like maybe an hour before podcast time,
Yeah.
or somebody will be like, can't be here today. Or
Yeah,
even worse is
last week's podcast was like we're setting up for the podcast, and Bird's like, "Oh yeah, I'm at the vet, by the way." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I guess we'll just start now.
I think we were already running late, and then we got the I'm at the vet thing. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, but is Birdcatcher still on call this week?
no, his on-call has ended. He's done with that, except for it coincided with an extremely inconveniently sick rabbit. And so he's been very focused on keeping that thing alive and going strong and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Because those
I guess we
rabbits
should
die
contextualize
really easy.
that too. If this goes on Colonel's channel and stuff like that. So the other person that's on this podcast usually, which was on the other 2 episodes Colonel was in, he works at Amazon, and they have a thing where they go on call where basically there's a certain percentage of the workforce that's on call, and it rotates each week or so, and basically that means if anything goes wrong that requires additional attention, those people get to come in. And it's been miserable for him, kind of, I think. I don't know.
It's just 2 weeks out of a year.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not making light of it though.
He
yeah,
was
it
getting
sucks.
paid so much at like inhumane times that like
Yeah.
his boss is just like, you just get a paid day off. It's not even counting as vacation or sick day. I'm just giving you the day off.
Yeah, but
fully.
apparently this time around it was so unusually bad that like he got like special treatment as a result of like, we need to like apologize for this.
Yeah.
Such is the life. Meanwhile, I'm like, I'm always on call, aren't I?
I'm a bit jealous. I'd love like a day where my boss just shows up and it's like, you know what? No, just
Your boss,
you're good.
the
We're
internet,
paying you anyway.
gives you a day off.
I know.
Of course, we're not the same thing at all because we don't have to
No.
ever do stuff in the middle of the night. But definitely, like, was it everyone's getting back together for Factorio right now? I'm slightly jealous because I'm like, I don't have weekends.
Yeah.
I don't have on and off time as much.
My brother went to Alaska with my dad, and I'm like, someday I'd like to go on vacation. someday. They're like there for 2 weeks, and I'm just like, I'm here playing video games. Except for, of course, during that exact period, Mario Rabbids came out, and Divinity was rolling up, and there was just too many new things coming out anyway. And I'm like, I could go on vacation, but one, that would screw me over, and two, I'd miss out on some good shit by doing so. So I'm like, I'm just like homebody by, well, not choice, but occupation.
I've gone on my handful of family trips over the last few couple of years and stuff, and I'll be gone for like 4 days. But like, I'm like, you need to tell me like 3 months in advance, please. Like, I need to know so I can plan for this stuff, because I need I need my channel to just not just disappear whenever I leave my house.
Yeah, Shell's parents had contacted me in August, being like, hey, well, I guess more Shell, but or like, hey, Wander's birthday is coming up. You want to go to Colorado for like a week? And I'm like, what? This is like 20-day notice. No.
That's why I always try to have a little bit of pre-recorded stuff so I can just play around with the episodes and all that. Today, for example, I just had the whole day off because a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, had a full day bachelor's party, I think it was. But it wasn't really a bachelor's party. It was just a party, I guess, because there were no strippers. So I guess not bachelor's party. But yeah, it doesn't count. Anyway, so I didn't record anything today. Still 6 episodes, 5? Anyway, yeah.
The last supposed bachelor's party I was at was just a Factorio land the night before a wedding.
That makes more sense, at least.
So you're actually like in the hot box right now, where you're dealing with what I had to deal with a couple of years ago, which is that I was working a full-time job while putting out while maintaining this like several videos per day schedule, and boy oh boy, yeah, you just stop having time. It just goes away.
Yeah, there's nothing else. I've been trying. Basically, everything is scheduled. Everything is planned, and I just do nothing else apart from work in video games, which is awesome because I love them. Work not so much, but I guess video games.
Oh yeah.
It also probably helps if you don't have too much of a social life. I don't know.
I actually had the weird experience. I had the weird experience where when I started doing this full time, I had a comparable output, but then would still be like, how am I running out of time? Like somehow I wasn't actually keeping up with what I was trying to put out. And I would realize eventually that it was like the reason was that like basically once you're not constantly under the gun, it's so much easier to lose time constantly. Like working from home is actually like hard to self-discipline sometimes. Whereas when I was like, I desperately want to keep my channel running while also working my job, like that would be like, I would come home and eat and then just start recording, and it'd be like when you had a final tomorrow in school and stuff like that. It's just like it has to get done, so it's getting done. But like the moment I have more leeway, I'm like my ability to just waste time will just find its way in.
Yeah,
like
I definitely. Sorry,
there wasn't much more to say. It was just that like recently I managed to get ahead again finally, and I'm actually sort of being more consistent finally. But there was a chunk of time where like I got down to 6 videos per day. How am I behind? I don't understand.
That's I definitely feel that. I've actually been thinking about that recently because there were a few days where I was out of work. I think it was actually my last week of vacation, where I had like a whole week where I didn't work, and I had to catch up with the recordings, and I had a pretty reasonable plan of just recording 3 more episodes per day than I usually do, and somehow I didn't manage it, and somehow I still was lagging behind, even though I didn't have to work. So in a weird way, it's almost as if, it's a lot of work to have a full-time job and YouTube, but at the same time, I don't know how much time I would gain from not working. Not that I wouldn't want to just say.
It also kind of points to like a certain level of like, it almost might be dangerous to always be doing work all the time, because the moment you have a little bit of leeway, you take it. Like you're like, oh my God, an hour of not working.
Yes, definitely.
Like the way that your mind compensates the moment you have more time to work with might point to bad things about the day schedule where you're always working.
Oh yeah, I think there's also the other aspect where, I mean, at least in the recording side of things, streaming might be different, but you can't just do Let's Plays all day, like for more than a certain number of hours. You need a little bit of rest. So,
oh yeah,
and I think working, because it's not Let's Playing, it also helps you rest on that. So, like, to the point where I get home after a day's work and I'm energized. I'm happy to play, and I go on to play 4 or 5 episodes. So I think in a weird way, it's like resting all day and just doing Let's Plays at night.
Yeah, you're kind of changing. It's not the same thing as working a day job because you're using different parts of yourself in weird ways, and that actually comes up with when I make videos with Wander and Bird and Andrew and stuff like that. Is that like I will. There's one type of commentary that is solo commentary, and then a totally different thing that happens when you record with somebody else. And weirdly enough, you can and Wander talks about this frequently because he'll sometimes talk about needing co-op, basically, that because you'll get drained by 3 hours or something of recording solo RPGs or roguelikes or whatever, and then you can just switch gears over to I'm gonna play with Bird and Keith now, and this is just a different part of me, and suddenly you can just keep going when you actually seemed tired before.
When I do extra live streams, the 24-hour thing, which, I mean, 24 hours is kind of impossible.
Are you ever going to make it?
I've made it 22 hours, and I think that was good enough. And then I'm probably just going to do a 16-hour long stream for the one in November this year. But each one I do, I try to...
Are you almost up again?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
It's first Saturday in November or something like that.
I've always had the excuse of being too far behind to do it, but this time I might not be too far behind. But
Extra Life is awesome if you actually kind of have a plan with what you're going to do. So when Extra Life came around, was it last year? I think it was last year. I more or less said, I'm just going to stream everything that I need, and then have a 4-hour chunk in the middle that I'm just going to play with my friends. And then go back to doing whatever. So I had an insane amount of backlog for literally every series, except for the multiplayer stuff, which I had to delete because I guess nobody else wanted to be there at the time. But it really does help having just someone else to play with for a little while, where you don't have to be the only thing keeping the game running.
Yeah, I think November 4th.
Almost here. Just another month.
I might have to do it for once, and I'm scared.
I mean, if you want to do a co-op Extra Life thing, that would probably make it a lot easier.
For 24 hours.
No, fuck that.
Then we're I hate you now. I don't want to speak to you ever again.
Let's do 16 hours. We don't have to be playing together the whole time, but
Extra Life 24-hour podcast. The first ever 24-hour podcast. We did it.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever... Is there any such thing? Such a long podcast?
Sort of. The 24-hour podcast would be kind of what Rooster Teeth does for their Extra Life show, where they just have kind of a podcast show where people are cycling in and out, and maybe somebody's playing a game in the background, but it really is just a long, glorified podcast the whole way through.
It's basically this is our room, and we're going to stream this room, and stuff will happen.
Yeah.
We're going to taser this person. Here's the guy from Reading Rainbow. Isn't this weird? And now I don't know. They just go through phases all day and they schedule it. But they're lucky because they also rotate out 100 people. So almost nobody has to be burned out the way normal Extra Life streamers.
Are they that big?
Premises?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The company's gargantuan.
Yeah.
I've kind of fallen off the Achievement Hunter, Rooster Teeth, Funhouse train. I just haven't had an interest. I'll try and pick up a video, but I've been watching them going about their office and doing shenanigans or how Rooster Teeth as a whole works, and it's fascinating because they really do have 100 people. They have whole buildings dedicated to making props and shit, and it's mind-boggling.
Not a lot of YouTubers have an office big enough to skateboard through.
Yeah.
Really the best way to explain it.
Yeah, they've got just more or less a really nice fancy office crammed into 4 or 5 warehouses, which works great for them, and I'm super jealous. But So they have that many people.
Yeah, I've never really watched their stuff, to be honest. I know they're very big. The only I've seen a few 24-hour and 48-hour actually live streams, and the one that I really like the most is was one I think back 2 years back by a group of they're called Mindcrack. That's their name. And they play a lot of Minecraft stuff and that. And I really like that one in particular, not only because they're an interesting group, but they had a lot of support from Microsoft and all the cameras and all that. They were really well done and all that. So it wasn't just a single room with a single camera or a few cameras, but focused on a single room. It was more of a higher production budget. It was a lot of fun, actually. I didn't see it all the way through because 48 hours is crazy, but I've seen others where it's just a lot more tamed, and it depends a lot on the people that are doing it, I guess.
I feel like I try to turn it into like a project, like go over to Andrew's house and be like, let's see if we can beat the entire Halo franchise in 24 hours.
Yeah, see, that's kind of why I was suggesting it. I was like, if we could just pick a game and just beat it in one day, that is always satisfying when it happens.
I feel like I'd have to try to like feed off the energy of being in a room with someone or something in order to make it for like a marathon live stream.
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm like iffy on the 24-hour thing, because honestly, like I've done a lot of all-nighters and like 24-hour whatevers, and they're just never really worth it.
No. No.
Like, they destroy... I mean, I don't remember most of my senior year of college because of how many like all-nighters I had to pull and like just working. There were a couple of periods in other years too that like I want to say it was finals week, sophomore year or something like that. I got a grand total of 7 hours of sleep in the whole week, and I was like catatonic. I got all my work done, but like that is just the biggest blur, and all I remember is finding myself at the freshman dining hall being like, I'm just eating a plate full of chicken nuggets and trying every available sauce, and mayonnaise to chocolate sauce. And that was the point where I realized I should never do this again.
Oh.
Yeah.
And for streaming, you get that crushing thing that happens, which is people from other time zones go to sleep, and then they come back, and you're still streaming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they're like, I just woke up. What did I miss? I'm like, oh my god, I'm still going.
Well, that's actually kind of a standard thing for me, because I stream in the evening, so... You know, I might get a little bit of the European crowd for a couple hours, and then they go to bed, and they wake up and I'm still streaming sometimes, and they're like, huh.
Yeah, your normal streams are often like, oh, Wander's still streaming. What?
Yeah.
Because, like,
it'll be frequently go for like 6 to 8 hours.
Sometimes it's like 2 o'clock in the morning for me.
Yeah.
And I'm in the time zone ahead of you. Or behind you, I mean, and you're still up, and I'm like, isn't it like almost morning for you now? What do you do? Who are you streaming for at this point? Are they still there? What demographic is this? I'm confused.
Other insomniacs, I don't know. I get decent numbers. The only time
you all
when,
have
like,
a disease.
Yeah, I go to
start
bed
an awareness
generally
campaign
about
for
5
your own
a.m.
audience.
You generally go to bed before I do. You generally have always gone to bed before I do, even though I used to be in even a further Eastern time zone.
And I was looking at my sleep schedule as a problem and trying to fix it, and so I've gotten further away from when you go to bed, because now I actually try to sleep at midnight like a normal person might do. That doesn't, well, what a normal person might choose to do. Most people can't stay up that late because they have to wake up at like 6.
Yeah, part of my problem is I don't actually wake up until about like 4 or 5 o'clock every day. Like, even if I get up at 10 in the morning, I'm like catatonic until the sun starts to go down. Then I wake up and then I'm like nice and energetic and so on and so forth.
I gotta diverge for a second.
Okay.
Have we talked about Fortnite Battlegrounds thing yet?
No, we haven't.
I just got reminded of it really funny right now because my newest comment on my channel is, this game is free, so please change your title or I will get Epic Games to take down your video. Which is adorable.
On your video?
Yeah. They said that on my Fortnite video. Because
it's not free.
Yeah, first of all, in no way is Fortnite free right now. You can't play it for free, period. But second of all, Fortnite is entirely... It's I think even if when it leaves early access and stops being free to play, starts being free to play, it's going to be monetized entirely based on microtransactions. So either way, it's like they're still trying to make money off of it. He's taking issue with the fact that my video is called "Let's Try Fortnite Battle Royale - Everybody Wants PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds Money," which is completely fitting for when Fortnite actively clones another game in their game. So yeah, we haven't talked about this in the podcast, have we?
No, we haven't.
Are you up to date on this at all, Colonel RPG?
Yes, I've read a piece earlier today, and I've heard Jim Sterling's take on the whole thing. But you can clarify, I think, maybe for the viewers as well.
So it is fascinating to see in practice. Like the moment this got announced, I got an email announcing the new mode as like their usual like general PR emails when they're trying to mobilize their audience to like check out the new updates that as they come out and stuff like that. It's a lot. It actually feels a lot like being subscribed to Orcs Must Die stuff, where they like relentlessly email you every time they sneeze, basically. But so Fortnite was a game that was announced like 5+ years ago, and I was really hyped about it because back then it was a super fresh idea, which was that it was going to be this like open world survival game where you scavenge during the day and defend your base at night, and you build up an actual location that you defend from oncoming hordes. And it was like, wow, it's like the interesting day-night cycle survival stuff from Minecraft, but in a game that's more built for combat as opposed to what Minecraft is, which is a game where you awkwardly click on people and they bounce away from you, and it's never been satisfying. So back then it was a super cool idea. It comes out finally after all these years, probably changing hands and dying as a project and reviving as a project over and over again over the years. And it's like a really shameless free-to-play grinding game where the mechanics mostly don't matter, and the mode that I thought the game would be about isn't even in there, and it's just a game where what you do is you spawn in an open world, scavenge for as long as you feel like, then click a start the mission button, and then you just defend that one spot against like 3 waves, and then the mission ends, and you do that over and over again for like dozens of hours as you grind for loot with higher numbers and stuff like that. It's really, and unfortunately when you get into it, it's not just a Skinner box. It has like 1,700 different layers of incomprehensible overlapping Skinner boxes, like at the like to the point where we were using the term Skinner box so often that me, Bird, and Wander during a recent podcast had to like dedicate the podcast to explaining Skinner's boxes, basically, because of how shamelessly monetized this game is.
I remember,
because it wants to make a billion trillion different ways that incentivize you to spend money on the game and grind forever and stuff. And oh boy. So it already was losing a lot of points in my book for becoming this massively unoriginal, really unfortunate, like every free-to-play game ever thing, where it's like, oh, look, another game that looks like TF2 and wants you to play forever for experience grinding and stuff. But now they lose even more points because they're being really overshined right now by the fact that PUBG came out, and PUBG is like the biggest Steam release ever, seemingly.
Yes.
Like, there are
Absolutely.
metrics you can look at where, like, the giant spike of player base that PUBG has right now completely dwarfs Grand Theft Auto 5. It completely dwarfs Fallout 4. It, like, not even now, but when those games came out. Like, it looks like... It's like looking at, like, one of those... What is it? It's like you look at one of those really strange, like, cityscapes where there's only one tall building, and that's what PUBG looks like. And then you realize all those short buildings are what those supposedly major AAA releases over the last 5 years were, and you're like, how is that real? But it's real. So in response to that very significant market share, Fortnite just explicitly made a PUBG mode in their game, and like to a really shameless degree. Like they're not even like... It's frustrating because, like, as it was added to the game in its original form, which I just went in and played a match of it, and because when I had the email, I just had to try it. I had to see what this was. I was already a player of the game anyway, and I knew I was in trouble immediately because when you load up the Battle Royale mode, it drops you into a 100-person lobby of standing on some island waiting for the match to start. And I'm like, oh, we're already starting off with the PUBG lobby. And then it puts you into an aircraft that flies over the island, and at any point you can press a button to jump out on a glider and choose where your starting point's going to be on the map, while also seeing where everyone else is jumping out, so you can kind of make your plans, where of course you drop with no weapons on you, and you have to scavenge all the weapons from scratch, just like in PUBG. And I'm like, whoa, this is the exact, not only the same like gameplay loop, it's like the same framing. Like, the only
Yeah,
real change was that your device, instead of being a plane, was like a bus that had wings or something, because they were being silly about it. But I'm like, this is concerning immediately.
I wouldn't mind it, I think, if it wasn't so shameless.
Yeah.
Like, if... I don't even know how they would do it any other way, but maybe that's just because lack of immediate thinking about it, just because Battle Royale modes generally don't interest me. But, like, if they had even, like, just changed up the presentation, you know, no flying bus, maybe everybody just gets sprinkled all over the place.
But then also, like, you land and you realize that they've moved the health bar and stuff from that's no longer on the top left of the screen. Now it's on the bottom of the screen, just like in PUBG, with your ammo being right above your health bar, just like in PUBG, with a compass on the top of the screen, just like in PUBG, with a mini map in the corner, just like in PUBG, that has an arrow, that has a line coming from your from your character in the middle of the mini map, pointing in the direction of the closing safety zone that's going to be closing every minute or so, and it has like the 100-person player count counting down as they all die, along with your number of kills so far, and the time it's going to be until the force field contracts again to make the player base run towards a specific spot. And I'm like, holy shit, dudes, you made these, it's the same. It's like they put all the mechanics in there.
Ugh.
Like, this is what happens when, like, somebody is like a Minecraft modder and they want to make another game in Minecraft, and they just shamelessly, like, it, like, because this game does have Fortnite's mechanics, but the game mode is literally every element shamelessly ripped from somebody else's property. But, like, it's okay when it's a modder, because it's like, oh, look at this dumb fan project. But when it's literally, like, an official mode made by the actual developers, you expect a little more integrity than that. Like, this is not coming from any kind of creative vision. Nobody was like, you know what would be a cool mode for our game? No, they're like, you know what game is really profitable and when our game's not, and we're desperate to make money, because because the player base of Fortnite, as far as I've heard, has been, like, plummeting. And it's not even out yet. So, like...
It died real fast.
So, like, they're just grabbing things. They're just like, we're falling, we're drowning, grab onto anything we can, and so they did this.
The weird thing is that Fortnite, I think, looking at the game, and always looking at the game, I remember now seeing a video of you guys playing Fortnite. Unless I'm completely mistaken. Did you guys played it, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did about 20 episodes of both PUBG and Fortnite, which is why we're somewhat of authority on the topic at the very least.
Yeah, the weird thing is that it's the Battle Royale mode. I think it's not at all a bad fit for the game. I think it is an interesting way to
I think it actually is a bad fit, because they so shamelessly took the PUBG mechanics, and they barely changed it to actually make it work for what was already there in Fortnite.
Oh, I see what you mean. I
think having a massively multiplayer versus mode makes sense for Fortnite, but what they did doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the thing. Why didn't they use their strengths? Because
why not make a mode where you make forts?
Yeah,
this game is about building forts. Like, because, it goes as simple as that. Like, a moment you ask that question, you're like, wow, this mode doesn't make sense for this game. Like, this is literally... That's why I say this is not a creative vision. This is not somebody saying, you know what's good for our game and a natural growth point, as opposed to a completely forced thing we're doing in order to profit from other people's ideas, is the fact that it directly contradicts the basic premise of the game. And when you watch this game, I've both played it myself and watched several other people play rounds of it, you see that both the player that you're watching and every other player they encounter, they're not building stuff. At most, they build a ramp to get up to a ledge.
A ramp, or like maybe a wall to hide behind.
And it's a game about building stuff. The game spawns you with a pickaxe so that you can, like, mine trees and rocks and stuff to build stuff with. Like, that's even this mode, it does that. But no one will ever... Like, there's no reason to do that, because you can't camp. So you can't make a fort.
How much more interesting...
spot.
Exactly.
How much more interesting would it have been if they had actually made it so you still have the Battle Royale mode, everything, but maybe it's even a bigger map. There's no forcing the players to get closer, not immediately anyway, but it does the day-night cycle thing, so you have to put down that fort to survive, otherwise the zombies get you. And so you have the threat of other players, but that core gameplay loop of the zombies, the husks, that was it. The husks are coming for you instead. And if you don't have a fort, you're pretty much doomed. but other players can like raid your fort, take stuff and stuff like that. They're like, that would have been so much more compelling.
Or here's an idea. 100 players, and they're confined into 2 teams, red and blue. They're put on they have 2 bases that are opposite of each other, like in Blood Gulch from Halo. But what you do is you start off with a giant open map, and it's the 100% like giant like square map that they have right now. And there's the 2 bases you have to protect or attack, depending on which team you're on. And what they do is there's all these nice, useful resources you can scavenge out in the wasteland way away from the bases, incentivizing you to explore and run around. But the playable area will slowly contract until it's literally a lane between the 2 playable bases. So you scavenge early on and fight against each other, and it's permadeath and all that. But then you also, like, as the time goes down, it becomes a base versus base combat. Like, it's not... I'm not saying my idea is perfect, but like it's you can think of really good solutions that would actually fit the game really quickly. So like in the process of making this mode, they would have had to have thought of like a dozen different things that actually would have fit their game. But instead of using any of those things, they religiously stuck to the exact rules, the exact pacing, the exact time limits, and the exact mechanics, all the way down to having the contracting blue force field from the game that's profitable right now.
I think that just screams of Slapdash job, probably. It's just the higher-ups at Relic? Epic?
And what
Epic.
sucks is that it doesn't speak to any of the strengths of the game it's ripping off, but also doesn't complement the strengths of the game that's being built in. Because, like, PUBG is, in many ways, PUBG is a stealth game.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to get the drop on people, and you blend in with the environment, and it's a huge wasteland, and like, there's shadows and details everywhere, and you're jumping at every little movement you think you see. In Fortnite, you're a TF2 character in a cartoon wasteland that can be spotted from 1,000 yards. And you can't crouch and you can't lay down.
Yeah, going prone, the lack of going prone was why I wasn't even interested in picking it up. I was like, so a Battle Royale game where you can't hide?
Which, by the way, still has sniper rifles.
Yeah.
And
Pass.
It's such an important... Even, I've never personally played any Battle Royale game, but I remember... like the very first few that made it, probably was it DayZ? One of the first, anyway.
DayZ was the first game that really, the first non-Minecraft game that really took off with this like open world survival thing that people like really got interested in, and that's the first one I hopped onto too.
Yeah, I got Arma 3 because of that, but I never ended up playing it. Neither Arma 3 nor DayZ, but you'd see videos of people just playing it, and just they'd be prone for 10 or 20 minutes straight, just trying to scout out a base or something like that. And that tension, I feel that was always what drove me to actually want to play that sort of game. And you can see another game that I actually enjoyed watching, called The Culling, that came out last year, was also Battle Royale, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, still the same sort of stealth-based mechanics and all the power-ups and all that sort of stuff, and very different as well, I think, from PUBG. I actually enjoyed watching it, but
I gotta ask, because it speaks to a criticism people keep using over and over again, almost like a hive mind, which is everyone always points to games like H1Z1 and stuff like that as being like, well, all these other games already do it. Have either of you played H1Z1? Like ever?
No.
I've never played. No.
I was really hoping you had. I'm trying to look at gameplay videos of H1Z1 to try to compare to it. As far as I can tell, H1Z1, at least on the interface, doesn't seem to have any indication of like having like exactly 100 players and a shrinking like like rounds that have a start and finish, and like I don't see anything about like a contracting force field or like
no I don't think it has a contracting force field.
Yeah.
I remember watching
like
a
people
few
are like
videos of
PUBG
it.
didn't invent battle royale mode, but I'm like, yeah, but I think it like I keep trying to research the other games without necessarily buying and playing every single one of them one by one. I can't find a single other game that actually plays like PUBG with that structure, but Fortnite literally took all of it.
The Culling, the Culling had the barrier. Though, I want to say the whole barrier thing is not unique, because I think the barrier was... The moving barrier, that is definitely that has definitely been around before PUBG. I've seen it in movies and...
yeah, it's a part of the
well, not movies.
Games.
We're talking about video game mechanics here, not like...
Well,
yeah.
No. So Battle Royale is... But, like, Battle Royale is based ultimately off of a book. Like, that's how we got Hunger Games. It started as a Japanese thing, and then became an American movie because some lady stole it, and then or was it some lady? It might have been
in many
Hunger
ways,
Games
it doesn't even start with Battle Royale, because we have movies like Condemned, that movie with like Sean Austin or whatever, that are a bunch of like, we're a bunch of prisoners on an island, only the last person that lives gets to leave, and like it's actually like a super long-term trope of last man standing as a fictional storyline.
Yeah, but like the moving barrier is not unique to PlayerUnknown's Battleground. I've seen it before, maybe not in video games necessarily, but it's not like a fully unique idea.
But I mean, like, talking about the genre of a video game, like talking about a video game genre being established and stuff like that, people keep citing every other Battle Royale as being like equally identical as PUBG, and so obviously Fortnite isn't ripping off PUBG, but I'm like, I can't find footage of any other Battle Royale game that is specifically like the game type that PUBG has, like even on a reasonable comparison beyond just like Last Man Standing being like the only real point of connection. Whereas Fortnite is like, we're going to rip every single rule from the entire rule set of PUBG one for one, and that's why it's so gross.
I think the easiest comparison would be like, do you remember kind of when MOBAs were coming about, and there was like 1 billion of them, and like half of them were clones, and ultimately ended up with like
a
sort
giant
of Heroes
square
of
map
North
with a diagonal center lane and 2 lanes that change right angles at the corners and that stuff.
Yeah. I think I might be a little bit desensitized to this argument because of that. Just because, you know, League of Legends and Dota are distinct games, but ultimately they're all based off of... It wasn't even Dota that it
even clones are better, though.
Yeah.
Like an actual clone, it's still even better because it's at least made for the thing that it's doing. But in the case of Fortnite, the game's not made for this mode, and the mode actively ignores all of the point of the game that it's in. And it's like, that's why it's so shameless and so like, how is this happening? Like, that's why it's so... That's why you immediately kind of recoil when you look at it, because it's like, it doesn't make sense on like a fundamental level. And like, the only reason to do it is the cash grab.
Yeah.
And
so the
really
follow-up... We should probably mention the follow-up is yesterday or the day before, the creators of PUBG were coming out saying like they were considering legal action or whatever. And people have been... You guys have heard this, right? Or no?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm looking at a Polygon article that reads, PUBG creators are unhappy with Fortnite Battle Royale, considering further action.
Yeah. And that is an interesting boat in and of itself, because of course... PUBG is based off of the Unreal Engine, which Epic Games makes.
Yep.
And that's so messed up.
That is
because not only are they ripping off, I mean, it just adds to the sameness of the two games, I feel, because they are using the same engine, the same mechanics, same interface design, and all that sort of stuff.
I'd almost say it's like a kind of cautionary tale to like further developers. Like, Unreal Engine is great, but now that kind of Epic Games has played their hand and said, yeah, we will copy a game that we think is more successful. Like, I guess Blizzard does the exact same thing, and honestly, if and when Blizzard makes their Battle Royale game, it'll probably be the best one on the market, but they're not selling an engine to people, so it doesn't feel... I mean, it's still kind of dirty, but it doesn't feel like as exploitative, because, yeah, if Bluehole does try and retaliate... Epic Games could probably revoke the license and doom PUBG.
Oh god,
yeah.
And like, there's a thing where like some people are talking about like how like the first comment you see on Polygon is somebody says, "There you go, folks. Not just big companies will try to claim ownership of random things like the word prey. Some will try to claim an entire genre." And it's like, no, this is not the entire genre. Like, they're not going after every random game that's in the same genre as them. This is a very specific, clear case of like one for one, like copy going on here.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And what's a bummer about it is that Epic Games has already shown the ability to innovate and do their own fresh take on things, because not only did they do Gears of War, which technically cover-based shooting had been in like 2 games before, but like they literally like carved out a huge thing for themselves that has influenced games for the last 10 years. But also, when they announced Fortnite in the first place, that itself was an innovative take that was all on its own of like what was being established by Minecraft. So they've shown like this is a game that started off as being an interesting, different take on a genre, and then became this. And that's like the contrast of example between the good example of how to do this and the bad example of how to do this are both in the same game now. And that's, I don't know why how people cannot get the difference when that's right in front of them.
Yeah. Money. And also
fanboyism, mostly.
Yeah, kinda.
Who needs to think when you can just pick a team?
Yeah. God,
I don't think that's ever going away, unfortunately.
No, it's not. I deal with it every day. I play Sonic games, sir. And 999.
It's so easy to just... I was reading a thing on arguing and why, debate, especially on the internet, has not been... Or like, well, maybe not on the internet, but like, more recently debate has been kind of bad in the world. Like, it doesn't work as well, is because the burden of proof has shifted not only so that, like, you can't just prove your argument anymore, you have to effectively beat the other person's opinion down so far into the group ground that they can't argue with you. To actually be like considered right. Like a lot of people will argue with me until they're blue in the face that like Dark Souls 3 is the best of the Dark Souls games, and I will always say like I like 2 because it was a little bit slower and had more like mechanics. But I can bring up all sorts of information and like point to different mechanics. And
I think
people
that
just
pie
kind
chart
of
has finally shifted to being almost equal between all 3 games in the franchise.
Interesting.
Which is probably for the best. I mean, they all had their merits. But the thing is, you can't have an argument with people on this because your opinion isn't valid in the face of theirs, and your proof isn't valid in the face of theirs. So what's the point of it?
There's also the best CGP Grey video ever, which is This Video Will Make You Angry. Have either of you seen that?
No, I have not.
Dark Souls 2?
Yeah, add it to your watch list or whatever. There's a video by CGP Grey called "This Video Will Make You Angry," and it's very useful for trying to understand why people are so bad at arguing and so on. And,
what? I have seen that video,
and it speaks to the way that people handle information on the internet is often that like people are so bad at arguing and debating and seeing the way other people see, mostly because they don't actually talk to those people. They mostly get together in a group of people they agree with, and then they yell about this other group that they don't agree with, but they mostly argue about the fictional construct version of that group as opposed to the group themselves.
Very much
I was actually pointing that out, I think, on your Discord a week ago or something, that people, when you were having your giant argument over what is real and are copies of people real things. Don't bring it up
while he's here. No.
But I had kind of pointed out that everybody just sounded like they were just kind of rehashing their argument, and like maybe in a lot of these arguments, one of the main problems is there's no like organization to it. Like, when I see people argue about
conversation, we were talking to each other, though.
Yeah,
like
that helps.
What happens instead is the Facebook effect usually, which is that you go to like if you're a liberal or conservative or whatever, like look up a Facebook page dedicated to the other party and read the comments and how they demonstrate what you think and like how warped that sounds. And then go back to a Facebook page about a group you agree with, and then read about and then look at how they talk about the group you disagree with, and you'll notice that the two of them talk about each other really similarly. But when you look at the other group talking about your group, it's not at all what you think and how you process life and stuff like that. And that'll open your eyes about how useless the information and arguments are from your side.
I think this issue has a lot to do with a lot of stuff that we probably don't want to talk about here.
No.
But regarding video games...
But this topic is useful for everything.
Yeah, it's useful for everything. The thing, I think there's a concept that has been showing up recently that I've actually only recently been introduced to as a concept. It's called I don't want to go too much into it because I guess it has a lot of permutations, but it's the marketplace of ideas. Whereas I think it's kind of, I think recently we're seeing that more and more on the internet, because that's what you were saying. It doesn't matter. It's kind of a post-truth sort of thing, as it were, but not in the sense of like anything like postmodernism or anything like that. It's it doesn't matter what the arguments are. It matters how many people agree with you. So that's where it comes. I mean, maybe they have won the argument already in their mind or in your mind or whatever, but they will still try to pull you down as much as possible because that's how they win. When I say they, I mean in sort of this sort of mentality.
Well, yeah, that's how you win an argument, is to get the other person to stop arguing back.
Yeah,
there's the tribalism issue of like, we need to make this as simple as possible and also give no ground. So every argument on the internet becomes two exact, specific arguments that are directly opposed to each other, and no gray area or other wiggle room can exist. And those two just battle it out mostly by not listening to each other, even though they may not even even though they don't even necessarily fully like represent most of the people even on each side at some point.
Yeah, because that's the thing. It's what I think there was a podcast where he said moderation is the best. Basically, I think you Keith said moderation is the best thing, but it's not. I don't think it is the best thing in the sense that you need to agree a little bit with both sides, because that's a different sort of moderation.
No, you just specifically need to not subscribe to a group.
Yeah,
you just need to be impartial. That's it.
Which is not the same thing as being centrist.
No, yeah, exactly. That's exactly. What I feel is it's what you were saying, I wonder, that people attack an idea of the other group. Like somebody, you'll see this in Dark Souls. I've had discussions about Dark Souls a little bit because I'm only really playing the first one for right now. But I will see arguments being raised against me that I can't even make, and the people are expecting me to make that argument. I'm like, what?
On a regular basis, both for this podcast or topics related to Dark Souls or really anything that has any divide of ideology, the moment you even slightly criticize one way or another, they bring up their manifesto of the 17 arguments that people like you make and stuff like that, and they just start arguing against this paper, basically, that's not you. And you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, man. I didn't say any of those things. What's going on right now? It's like, during the 999 series, people will be like, you hate anime, and I'm like, I'm literally in the middle of editing a podcast about how fucking the Death Note anime is better than the Death Note Netflix movie. I'm like, what do you mean I love that one, by the way? I'm like, god damn it.
Thank you so much for making that one. That was so good.
Because people care more about ignoring your argument, like rather than addressing your argument itself, or admitting that maybe you might have a point about that individual thing, and maybe that doesn't have to actually besmirch whether or not they like the thing, and maybe we could just be adults about this. Instead of being reasonable like that, they'll instead try to go around your argument, not address it at all, and then try to discredit things about your personality or what you said about other stuff, and like they'll try to use things against you've said elsewhere, or just make up stuff about you, essentially, about your stance to discredit you, and it's like, we could just have a conversation. It's fine. You can just...
Yeah, but the conversation requires that people want something out of a conversation in the first place. They want to gain something from that, and they just want to win. Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do. I think people just like, it's a sort of a defense mechanism to demonize the other side, as it were.
Well, it's a lot easier to fight somebody who is evil than different.
If you can replace the reasonable, normal human being that actually is saying the stuff with a crazy effigy that has unreasonable beliefs, then it's really easy to argue against that person that's not real. And so the people do that every day.
And the internet makes it a lot harder to not demonize the other person. And I think even me, who I'm conscious about this effect, I think I have to work all the time when I see somebody making the weirdest claim or the weirdest attack, and I need to work all the time to try and... It's a person that's talking, a person that has thought a lot about what they believe in, and we all need to do that. It's just not something that comes naturally, even in real life, let alone on the internet. And then, of course, I think cell phones destroy the internet. People are commenting too much on their cell phones.
It's... the cell phones that destroy the internet.
Yes. We need to go back to desktop computers for everybody.
So what have you been playing, Colonel? Or do you want to keep going on this topic?
No. I think we could rave on this for all day, but
yeah, but I think we've kind of covered it.
Yeah.
You have a game you want to talk about lately?
Yes, we could talk about Divinity Original Sin 2 in a little bit, but just regarding what I've been playing, I talked about it the last time I was here on the podcast, and I've right after I finished Torment Tides of Numenera, that actually
you went
didn't
back
do
to
very
the
well.
original?
Yes, I started playing Planescape Torment, and it shows that it's an old game. It shows that also it's from a company that doesn't have the background of role-playing games that we have right now when we make a game these days. So it still shows that it's an old game, but that game, it's just so well written in so many levels. It's so different from everything I've seen so far. Even different from Tides of Numenera, because it doesn't
up a
overly...
lot. When people talk about like best CRPG ever made, it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
I just wish it didn't hurt me to look at.
I think, the graphics. The way I look at it, it's pixelated. It's kitsch. It's like Stardew Valley.
But weirdly enough, the biggest thing is not so much the actual in-game graphics with a lot of these CRPGs from beyond the old days, like Baldur's Gate and Planescape. The biggest thing that turns me off is actually the interface. I'm like, why does it look like
the
that?
The interface is huge.
Why is there a floating skull with a green gradient behind it? Why? No, that's going to be on the screen the whole time.
I tried playing Baldur's Gate 1 a while back with my brother and my dad, and eventually had to like put it down and be like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. This game has not aged.
Like when they make Pillars of Eternity and Wasteland 2, they actually don't look much better or different from the old school ones necessarily. But the interface and like UI and bottom bar and like the openable like interfaces or like item management stuff are like so many leagues progressed now, and it's like
for sure.
I always have that recoil moment of like, oh man, that's gonna be the game. Okay.
The reason why that's actually funny. I never thought about that because I just grew up playing those games. But you asked why there's a green bar, a green circle. I think it might be because of the origins of Baldur's Gate, which was the first game.
Oh no, I'm talking about one of your party members is represented by a screaming floating skull, and the background is just a weird green gradient, and they have a rainbow health bar, and it's like, what are these design elements? What's happening?
Oh yeah, that's different.
Whereas like one of your most popular videos is when you played actually Wasteland also is among there, but when you played Pillars of Eternity and stuff, and like you can see the gap in progression. Like Pillars of Eternity, at the distance you play it at, doesn't look that newer than the rest of its genre, but the interface is like, yes, I can do this. I'm comfortable now. Yeah, one of these days I'll like plug my nose and get in there, because I do want to play Planescape because it's supposed to be incredible.
I think you get used to the interface. I mean, the graphics as well, but the interface, you just get used to it. Definitely play the enhanced edition though. I was kind of afraid to play it because I had the original, so I guess I just couldn't get it to record properly.
Yeah.
But
there's the worry that they'll somehow screw it up.
Yeah, exactly. Especially on the back of playing Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 enhanced editions. But I think Planescape, it's not easy to convey, which is funny because that's what I'm trying to do, to convey why it's so different, why it's so refreshing. It's even... Oh, it's so... I mean, it's one of those cases where you'll have to absolutely play it to see, and you'll spend hours in a single room talking to a couple of characters over the weirdest stuff. And it's not like in Tides of Numenera, because I think in Tides of Numenera they really focused a lot on world building. So you'd find characters that talk a lot about this quest or that quest, but it's always in relation to the world. The characters in Torment, I've noticed that they have a lot more tendency to just go on tangents regarding themselves and characterize themselves through their perspective rather than just talking through or about the world itself.
Or just being like, I am an Asari. We produce asexually. We meld with our brains.
I'm like, nothing like that.
Your mother just died. What's happening? How is this the conversation we're having?
Yeah, now you say that, it's just so out of everything else, and
the way every
shows...
other RPG handles its world building is via incredibly forced companion dialogue. Usually,
yeah, I think it shows why so many people look at it as the best RPG ever made. And I mean, I say so many people, a lot of the people who've played it, and I recommend sometime in everybody's life they should play Planescape Torment. It's something else, for sure. But I recognize that it is tricky to get into. Try to push past, I think.
Well, wasn't also the most recent, like the not the revival, but the more recent Planescape one, wasn't that one also kind of considered to be a bit of a wash?
Yes, that's really, actually, I made a video about that because I see that. I think it's a little bit worrying. I mean, because it's a game that took a long time to get developed, 3 years of development, at the very least. It got a pretty successful Kickstarter, and I think it sold like 200,000 copies. And it's
mixed reviews on Steam.
Yeah, I mean, those reviews are definitely from a lot of people who have played Planescape, and I agree with them now that I have played Planescape Torment, the original one, because it doesn't live up. I think it took too many. It took like, there's a lot of direct inspiration, like in without any spoilers.
You kind of had the ideal experience because you played the reboot or whatever you want to call it first, not knowing what was changed or missing or like what you were losing out on, and then you got to go back after kind of enjoying it or whatever, experience why people were saying it sucked by comparison without feeling that the whole time. It's like watching the movie based on a book before reading the book, then going back and reading the book. It's like, I got to like the movie. Like I got to like the movie first.
So I got it 2 times, twice. But it's very much like that. You can see direct parallels, like characters that are the same sort of character that talk the same way. There's like they narrate themselves rather than say the stuff, or like the Blood War in Dungeons and Dragons, which is a big center point for the whole mythos. It's directly lifted out, like it's a big point in Planescape, and there's a similar thing in Tides of Numenera. Like the whole focus of the game itself, it's the same idea, it's the same questions that are being asked. So it's a rehash. Oh effectively.
No! So it's Andromeda.
Well, Andromeda did. I mean, I watched your Let's Play, but did you feel that it rehashed a lot of the stuff from the original Mass Effect?
I had a breakdown when I hit that one mushroom, as you might remember, where. Do you remember the mushroom rant? So there's a point in Mass Effect Andromeda where I encountered a mushroom, and it was already in a bad spot because like Mass Effect 1 ends, well, right before it ends, when you get to the climax moment, that's like the location before the final location, but it's during the linear ending. You reach the planet that is supposed to be this place the Protheans were on, and there's pods of all the people, like where the Protheans used to be in, and that's where you get the big unveil that recontextualizes part of the story right before you go forward to the climax and stuff like that. And lo and behold, near the end of in the second to last plot point of Andromeda, you get to an alien planet that is from the before time people, and there's pods full of bodies, and all throughout the area, all the way, like in both cases, it was like pods all the way up the walls, like vertically and shit.
I remember.
And while you're there, you then get unveiled the amazing secret that changes the context of part of the story. And just as an icing on the cake, right when I was about to actually unveil that plot point, I found a giant mushroom, and I scanned it. And that mushroom was like, it looks like a mushroom, but it only looks like a mushroom. It's actually nothing like a mushroom. And then it doesn't continue to explain why it's not like a mushroom. It just stops there. And so, like, all it does is say, it looks like a mushroom, but it's actually not. And I'm like, wow, this looks like Ilos, but it's actually not. And, like, this Mass Effect's original trilogy and Andromeda are both about an invading alien race that, like, wants to wipe out the people that actually live there, but also incorporate their DNA in some way in the process. And I'm like, what? Come on, guys. You can make new stories. And they both had Protheans, but not Protheans. And then, and the before technology that manifests all the plot points that's just conveniently there already. And I'm like, oh, so it sounds like this is kind of like Andromeda in that it's like they, instead of making something genuinely new, they keep recycling ideas from the
Yes.
before thing, and it makes the whole thing feel cheap and derivative when you were promised something new and interesting.
Exactly. I think Andromeda didn't do quite as good a job as Tides of Numenera.
No, most games are better than Andromeda.
Yeah, I don't want to bash too much on the dead horse, literally, apparently. But I enjoyed Tides of Numenera a lot. When I finished it, I felt it was the best game that it could be. But then I played the best game that it could be. I still haven't finished it, but it's just, no, it could have been better. Could have been better.
It was less Andromeda and more a Jurassic World.
Wait a minute. That's a different rant.
I did not like.
Do you have a rant for Jurassic World?
No.
Or him.
No, Keith. Yeah, Keith.
No, I've never seen Jurassic World, actually. I've just heard everyone talk about it being what it was.
I'm confusing podcasts here. I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't particularly interested in watching another reboot franchise.
Yeah, let's avoid Jurassic World. I have words for that that do not need to be.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, why did you do that?
I never talked about Ghostbusters on the podcast, did I?
No. Do we need to? No.
We can.
No. You can
Did you
spoiler
watch it,
cast
Wonder?
that alone in your shame. And that's where it belongs.
You know what? The biggest surprise wasn't the reboot of Ghostbusters. It was watching Ghostbusters 2.
Really?
Have you guys seen Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2?
I have.
I had the
Ghostbusters 2
experience-
is just a giant blank space.
So I had the experience of watching them on back-to-back days, because over 3 days, that each evening I watched a Ghostbusters movie. Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 are the same movie. Like,
Yeah.
not only do they have the same plot points dealing with the same characters, all the way down to the same damsel dealing with the demon in both movies and stuff like that, but characters appear and disappear at almost the same time code in the movie, to the point where, it's originally 3 professors and they hire a 4th guy, and the 4th guy is like he evens out the group, but he kind of is detached from the whole thing, and he only shows up like halfway through the movie in the first movie. In the second movie, he immediately disappears and then shows up again halfway through the movie, and I'm like, what? It's like it's almost like they recycled the same script note for note, and that's probably why people both forget what was in that movie and why it was so poorly received. I was actually actively confused by how much it felt like I was watching the same movie 2 nights in a row, like note for note.
And it's only 5 years in between the 2 movies. Why did they do that?
I think it was just, it's one of those moments, almost like Andromeda and stuff like that, where it's just like someone mandated that a thing be made to follow up on the success of another thing because it'll make money, and no one had ideas or creative spark behind it, so they just did like the most cynical thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Bill Murray hated Ghostbusters start to finish, and I'm fairly certain Ghostbusters 2 is just a quick cash grab where they're like, okay, what can we do to get this done as fast as possible without actually, like, trying? And then with the remake, it was kind of that, but let's play on the nostalgia bit a bunch and then try and make it, like, hip and modern, which
like it even
also
gets
didn't
as
work.
specific as, like, Sigourney Weaver will be doing something artsy in the background because that's her job, and then she'll get mixed up with some, like, someone that's on like the socially dysfunctional spectrum, probably because of how nonsensical their interactions with her and how inappropriate they always are. And then that person will be in some way possessed by the demon and be involved in the climax when the demon is attacking Sigourney Weaver and stuff like that, because that happens in both movies. And then right when the Ghostbusters are getting down to business, like, I think we know what's going on, that's the exact moment when the mayor arrests them, or in the second movie sends them to a psych ward, which is another form of sending them to jail. And then while they're in prison, they hatch the scheme on how to defeat the thing, and then break out to go defeat the thing. Oh no, they don't break out in both movies. I think the authority figure then was like, "Oh no, we're actually screwed. We got to let them out to take care of it." I'm like, it's the same movie. It's so confusing how much it's the same movie.
I have no idea. I'm lucky enough. I'll say I'm lucky enough. I don't really mean that, because I've never, I don't think I've ever seen even the animated versions or anything.
Yeah, if you ever get around to it now, you'll know in advance, so you'll be looking for it, and it'll be like the most interesting, was it like it's just like
experiment, I
a
guess.
learning experience. Like once you know it, it's like it becomes a study, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna watch for it now. Like, whoa, is this screwing with me? There's really not much to say about the reboot. It's just it's made by that one guy that just films a bunch of improv and then edits together. So it's exactly like all the other movies that guy makes, which I don't like. But if you like them, you'll like that. But I don't like comedies that aren't written. You know what I mean? Like there's comedies out there there's comedies out there like the Cornetto trilogy, like like stuff like Baby Driver or Shaun the Dead or Scott Pilgrim and Hot Fuzz, like all the stuff that he makes. Like those are written comedies. They have jokes that were written on a script and edited together and carefully directed. And there's other comedies that are made nowadays where a bunch of improv actors that were probably SNL actors get together and just improv a lot, and they just edit those together to be all the comedy scenes. And it's just like
for feature movies.
Yeah, that constantly, like Paul Feig movies and stuff like that. What is it?
I'm looking over his movies and I don't know a single
Bridesmaids
one.
Or this movie or like a lot of other ones are like they're basically just some comedy actors that are used to being around each other that are just yes-anding each other a lot, and then they take the best takes or mix together the best takes and make that be every comedy segment. So it means every comedy segment doesn't have like momentum. It doesn't really like go anywhere, and it doesn't have sharp writing or anything because it's just people standing still and saying stuff to be funny back to back. And you know that they just improv for like 2 hours and took the best take, and that's the whole movie. And I'm like, I can't, like, it's in many ways it's the opposite of Ghostbusters because that was a written comedy. But like it used to be that people would be like, oh wow, you know that one funny thing, that one really interesting part, that was improv. Isn't that crazy? But nowadays, like the entire movie's improv, and that's not a good change.
Yeah, it's just cutting work.
This isn't like Mass Effect Andromeda or like Star Wars prequels where you can like sit there and like just agonize over all the plot holes forever. It's just like the overall movie is a thing that a lot of people won't like and other people will like, and it's like that's actually the biggest change. Isn't that like, oh, they're female? It's like, oh, it's an improv movie. It's one of those. It's a Paul Feig movie. Good luck, have fun. Your mileage may vary.
I recognize his face. I think I've seen him in a few television series, maybe. Looking at his work, but I didn't know that movies like this were made. That sounds really weird.
People like it. Yeah, he did Ghostbusters, Spy, Bridesmaids, Heat. He does a lot. He does a lot of the movies that actually have what's her name in it. I'm blanking.
Kristen Wiig,
Melissa McCarthy. Melissa McCarthy. Yeah, he does most of those movies. Yeah, if you see Melissa McCarthy in a movie, or you see what's the other guy, Kevin Hart in a movie, the movie's probably improv. It's probably just improv comedy where they hired comedians to just be funny, and the movie will just come together in editing. And I don't like that trend. And so
now that I saw Melissa McCarthy, I know who she is. I think I've seen Bridesmaid on cinema, and that movie completely vanished from my brains forever.
And that's because most of the runtime is like just wasted time, essentially.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to keep it in your brain.
Even though it had what's her name? I don't know. I don't remember her name now. I can't remember the name.
Bridesmaids had a good cast.
Yeah, yeah. But I completely forgot about it. It's not the sort of movie that sticks with you, I guess.
No.
That's why I don't watch movies too much. Is because I am always looking for those that I know at least are gonna make me think, even if they're not. Like, for example, I think the last movie that I watched that I really didn't like was that one movie with there's some aliens that come in like a egg-shaped spacecraft that talk in circles. Does that sound?
Oh, The Arrival.
Arrival, that's the one. And I really didn't enjoy it, but at least it made me think. And it's also always a reference to when I want to talk about that sort of thematic. I can just say, this movie kind of deals with that, and there's this. And I think that's the sort of stuff that really engages me.
Like,
all the time.
like it or not, Arrival will be burned into your brain as a reference point for a specific idea that might come up in other contexts. And you'll be like, oh, it's like Arrival. And then you can use Arrival, like the way that I would use Soma to explain certain concepts when they come up in other games. Like, Arrival fits that brain space of like, this is a new thing to refer to. And those are always better than watching another, I don't know, kind of time waster. Another Adam Sandler film or something.
Yes, definitely.
Like, let's watch Adam Sandler's latest paid vacation. He wanted to go to the Caribbean this time, so this movie takes place there.
You mentioned Soma. You don't want to talk about Observer, do you? Or do you?
I'll talk about... I'd prefer to talk about Observer in like a non-spoiler context to recommend it to people as opposed to spoiler casting it necessarily. We never did that, did we, Wander?
No, we never talked about Observer.
Because you started it, then and Bird started, but you both bounced off of it immediately.
Yeah, Bird and I talked about how we had trouble with it, how he loved the part I didn't love, I loved the part he didn't love, and then our audiences just had no interest in either, so it was...
Yeah, and I think when you talked about it, I literally took my headphones out and walked away or something, or like browsed the internet for a while, because I didn't want to spoil the game, because I looked at the Steam page, I'm like, that's my jam.
You hadn't even started playing it. In reference to that, you mind if I talk about Echo, seeing as I just finished that last night?
Yeah, do you want to wait till we talk about Observer first or something? Or
sure, yeah, you can do. I didn't know if you were dancing around the topic because I was I just didn't want
to do spoilers on it because I want to recommend it to people. Yeah, because I think it's neat, even if some people disagree with me about what the ending means or something. But it's one of those. It's a recent trend in indie games to try to get mileage out of your game by following along with this trend that's become... I think BioShock kind of kicked it off with like popularizing environmental storytelling and slow methodical exploration and poking around for audio logs. Obviously, those very developers made other games like that before, but BioShock was like the giant critical mass game that sort of got people used to this again, especially because it was a popular console game as opposed to a niche PC game. And more recently, PC games have gone, like they've done the, Gone Home, and Tacoma I haven't played, but Bird has, and What Remains of Edith Finch. It's becoming popular to make these indie-ish games that are like somewhere between 2 to 10 hours long of mostly slowly poking around people's living quarters and learning about them and what happened there and stuff like that, and coming up with a story that works with that idea. Because it both works on I can make a whole game out of this that doesn't have a billion like square miles of area to cover because it's a small project, but also I can meaningfully, using this genre, you can meaningfully make a decently long game that actually doesn't feel like it's wasting your time, and it doesn't feel like it's full of padding because it's about the details. And Observer is very much about that. You're investigating. You're playing an investigator that's going and trying to find, in this case, your son, who may or may have not been murdered, and you're trying to figure out what's going on in this apartment complex, and you're just slowly going through these different apartments, finding passwords to different doors, or going through people's emails and digging through their private details, and it's all a giant experience and really fun world building, because it takes place in a cyberpunk setting, and you're playing as an observer, which is this character that can actually hack into people's brains and experience some version of their life as a result. And so you can not only investigate the apartments and the setting, which is all very carefully rendered and beautiful, and not beautiful as in like good to look at, but beautiful as in like beautifully put together. It's a disgusting location. It's horrible. Yes. But it has this added detail of you can jack into people's brains. And that seems and when you jack into their brains, you don't just get a literal recording of their memories. You get a nightmare, essentially. And the game's not clear on whether that always happens or if it just happens in this game because everyone you jack into is either dead or dying and like that, and maybe that's making it worse or something. But it essentially becomes like a psychedelic nightmare. Like it's like a mixture of that person's trauma and actual memories that they've had. So like the conversations that they witnessed will be replayed to you in their real form, but then the room can be wrong. Like the wall might be flesh, or there might be 100 washing machines all stacked on each other in a hallway that are all going at it at once, and like there's like the settings become fantastical, and it becomes a real trip. But unfortunately, I found that actually became the weak point of the game, is that especially the early on these brain hacking moments are way too long. Like some of them are 40 minutes, 60 minutes. I'm like, by the time you get back to the real world, you're like, what was I even doing? What was I doing before I hacked into that brain? Because like they lose their effectiveness and get diminishing returns because of how long they are. But overall, I found the world building and story and exploration just captivating, and the atmosphere and sound design was all creepy and unnerving, and the game constantly makes you it often makes you feel like you're constantly in threat, even though the overall number of like monster segments is like I would say is maybe like 3 minutes total of what was, I think, a 10-hour game for me. And I had a great time. It's a cool thing, and if you like those kinds of stories about consciousness and about like cyberpunk settings and stuff like that, and also like that gameplay style of like What Remains of Edith Finch and stuff like that, then it's worth checking out, I think.
I think there's not as... I can't speak from experience because I only watched your Let's Play. I think it's not as much... It's not quite as detailed on the world building as What Remains of Edith Finch, and doesn't actually manage to create that many theories, I feel.
Yeah.
But it's still, I think you're totally right there. The world building, I thought was really, really good. And what the detail I really appreciated was the way they treated them. I mean, not the length, but the memories, the way they were treated.
Just to comment on that, on what you were pointing at there, I think the main criticism there is that it's less focused than Edith Finch.
Oh,
Because Edith Finch, every room was about one continuing story about that family's curse and what the hell's going on in the story of Edith Finch. Whereas it's actually relatively scarce for stuff in Observer to be about the core story, and a lot of it is extraneous details about the world that it's in, as opposed to expanding on the core mystery.
I think that also shows on the length of the game. They might have done it on purpose.
Oh yeah, some people like if you watch the popular YouTubers that just blaze through games, this game is like 3 hours long according to them, as opposed to if you like poke around and everything, it's like 10 hours long basically. So your mileage may vary there. Also, just fair warning, because of I think it's actually what happened to both Wander and Bird to an extent, is that like if you have issues with like motion sickness or headaches or issues with weird filters on screens and all those other things where like the way that a game's visually presented can ruin the game for you, this might be a giant red flag game for you.
Yeah.
Although I guess if you get on
some
Steam,
serious
though,
motion sickness issues.
And the sound design doesn't actually help. I think it even makes it worse.
Yeah.
In some parts. That it was even difficult for me. I also have problems with motion sickness. It was even difficult to me to listen to sometimes, and watching was hard.
Yeah, it's a claustrophobic, headachy, like difficult to visually decipher at times game, and I almost never have issues with anything like that, so it didn't faze me at all. But there are people that'll immediately turn off. But yeah, if you get it on Steam, you will know that well within the refund period on Steam, so that's a plus. The only game that's hit me negatively in that way was that game where he plays Perception, where he plays the blind girl. That was the only one where I'm like, I can't look at this game anymore, because it was a pure black game where you would make sound waves that would like Daredevil essentially, and like the pure black to bright light to pure black for 4 hours straight was like, I can't look at this. Actually starting to hurt to look at this game.
Just before you played that one, you also played that Scanner Somber. I think it was that one. Didn't you have problems with that as well?
Scanner Somber didn't mess with my... I don't think it started to hurt to look at. But that was also a game about not being able to see, and essentially adding stuff to your environment that allows you to see. But Scanner Somber was more like Unfinished Swan than than perception, but also I had just played Unfinished Swan. I don't know why I went on a kick on games where you can't see.
Well, probably because somebody gave you all those suggestions in the same bunch, and you maybe
No,
that sometimes
it's
happens.
the what's the effect where things from like the same topic come out close together, even though they have nothing to do with each other. Like there were 2 movies where the World Trade Center got bombed that came out in 2001, and no one had any idea, and they had nothing to do with each other, and they both obviously got removed, but it was just this weird effect of like, here's a thing that coincidentally happened at the same time as another thing, and like no one had any idea.
I don't know what that effect is, but you gotta research it and like write it down and paste it on your wall so that you can memorize it. And then
that does
just because now
yeah.
I'm having that effect on you mentioning that effect.
All right.
It's
we need
not
to get down to what it's called so we can
it's
stop
not the law
referring
of
to it as
attraction,
that one effect.
because that's a different one. Because the law of attraction is the whole thing about. Was it the? Oh, that was a book, The Secret, right? That's not that one. I mean, I know that was the book, but I mean, it sounds kind of similar, but I'm not sure that's what Wonder is referring to.
I just googled effect where once you notice. Let's see.
Well, that's a different effect. That's the effect where you see once you know something, you start seeing it everywhere.
The Bader-Meinhof phenomenon is the one you're talking about in that sentence.
That's a completely different one from the like 2 completely unassociated things coming out very close together for no obvious reason, or like,
I mean, that's just a coincidence, right?
Sort of, but like it happens not infrequently. It's like how kind of, I mean, in the games industry, it's not as like ridiculous for this, but we had, Battleborn and Overwatch more or less coming out at the same time, and obviously that was a little bit more planned because they were in direct competition. But like both of those games were started in secret well before, and then it just kind of was pure coincidence that they were more or less reaching the end of their development cycle at the same time. Though I think Overwatch was pushed up to beat out Battleborn, which worked out. But like this is the same thing with the movie The Day After Tomorrow, I believe it was. There was also a very similar movie that came out like almost the same plot, and I think it came out in the same year. And that was like a complete accident, and it just
The
happened.
Prestige and that other magician movie that came out the same year, I think.
Yeah, exactly, and it just happens, and no one knows why.
Do you have any closing thoughts on Observer?
No, I mentioned Observer because you mentioned Soma, and we had some interesting discussions about that. I don't think we can go or should go into all that, but
yeah.
I would just like to rehear your take on Observer, because I really felt it raised. I think it did a better job at raising questions than actually putting them to the test or even answering them in regards to how you approach the world, and that's why we had that discussion. Because I'm pretty sure if we talked about Soma, we wouldn't have too much disagreements. And even though I think
Soma answers the questions it raises, because answering the questions makes them scarier in that game.
Exactly.
The answers to the questions are even scarier than the questions in that game.
It's such a brilliant game.
Have you played Soma yet, Wander? Or
no, I haven't.
On yourself or anything?
That was just when I was like starting to grow my channel, and I requested a press copy, and they're like, "Yeah, we know we promised you a key, but turns out we don't have enough for you, and you're too small, so you didn't make the cut." So yeah. So that was one of those games where it's like, well, at least they sent a really nice email, but I'm already busy, so I guess I'm just gonna pass on it. And then obviously I've just been busy with everything else, so I just didn't even bother.
Someone's real fucked up. All right, Echo, shoot.
So Echo is kind of a neat game. I would put it closer to Outlast. It's very ultimately kind of a minimal gameplay experience. Usually you're running and hiding from a thing. In this case, game? Sort of. Suspense. It's got a little bit of body horror because the screenshots show it off, but the only enemy in the game is copies of the main character, and they learn from the main character. So, say if you sprint, they will start sprinting. If you shoot, they will start shooting. If you eat grapes, they will randomly eat grapes. If you open doors, they'll open doors. If you use elevators, they use elevators. But if you don't do any of those things, they don't do any of those things. And they will forget after a short while. Usually it's one cycle, but on higher difficulties, it takes them a little while to forget, because you're in a system, you're in effectively a program that is designed to learn from your actions. And so if you stop running, they stop running, because, it's trying to copy you. It's trying to use what you have against you. And it's actually like a really interesting game from like a stealth segment, because it really forces you to kind of pick and choose what abilities you use when, in a way that I've never seen in another game. Like in Dishonored, for example, you were kind of dissuaded from using the rat swarm because it was a high chaos action, and if you wanted the good ending, you couldn't do it. But I always thought that was kind of a bullshit reasoning for it. And it's like, so if I want to avoid the bad ending, I just don't use the bad powers. Alright, I'll just KOTOR this up and only use the light side powers and, like, knock people out with sleep darts. But so in this game, you can sprint if you need to, but it'll come back to bite you. My favorite part was actually when you really, really learn what they can learn and can't learn, is you walk out into this area and there's all of these echoes, the clones of the main character, and they're just standing around on little islands. Effectively, the entire room's covered in water except for a couple spots. And you walk out onto it and they just stare at you, and they like get up close to the water, but they can't figure out how to get into it. And they're standing there, they're watching you, but they can't reach you. And then the whole thing resets.
Creepy.
It's really creepy, actually.
Who's making this game?
I don't know.
Ultra.
Yeah, I've never heard of them before. This is their first game, I believe.
Like most interesting weird games that pop up on Steam, they have no history when you look up their Steam page. You have to do you have to dig way deeper.
I've been trying to figure out who... Yeah, because this sounds like the sort of game that if it was made by the same guys that made Dishonored, because they have a lot of experience.
Those people are too busy making Prey and then more Dishonored right now.
Yeah. But so the premise of it is...
amazing.
Yeah, it just says there's some company from Denmark and doesn't say anything about their background.
Yeah, nothing. I could find almost nothing on them, but I picked it up.
Not even like the Red Barrel's elevator pitch of being like, we worked on like BioShock and GTA or like 17 other AAA games. Like none of that's there either.
No, they just made this out of nowhere. It's weird. But so the way the game works is you have kind of a quota of what you can teach them before it'll reset. So if you don't do anything, it almost never resets. At one point I did a test. I stood stock still for like 10 minutes straight, and ultimately it didn't reset. It didn't learn enough from me, so it wouldn't like reset and make them learn to not even move. Because I was hoping that I could cheese the system and convince them that moving was bad. And so I just have one like day cycle.
Like they're a Braid clone?
Yeah. I was really hoping I could just convince them to stand stock still while I just ran through the level gleefully. But it looked like, I couldn't cheese the game that bad, which, I mean, that's fine. But yeah, so what happened is for the water segment, you walk out into the water and you're all fine, and then the lights go out, and then they learn how to walk in water, and suddenly you have a bunch of clones of you chasing after you in a big open room where there's no cover to hide in or anything like that. And so, I think that was the first time I actually pulled out my gun and shot. And as a result, because I shot while the lights were on, because if you shoot while the lights are off or do anything while the lights are off, they don't learn from that. So you can kind of bide your time and like get really risky as the lights are about to go off.
This game has periodic blackouts.
Yeah,
and that's like essentially when the cameras are off, like in Ex Machina. And that's like off the record parts where you can do whatever you want.
And so that's really cool because usually there's audio cues for when the lights are going to go off. So like, I know I've got about 30 seconds before the lights go off. I start walking just like as quickly as possible for the destination, because as soon as the lights go off, I can just open up. I've got 5 shots and I can get more ammo fairly easily. And so I can pick off anybody that's coming after me, and then I can also sprint, open doors, close doors, leap off ledges, all sorts of things. And so that gives me a grace period. But then as soon as the lights come on, anybody that I haven't killed will respawn where they were. and that gives me like about 5 seconds to get behind cover out of their range of sight. Or my favorite is to get up behind them, and as they're getting up, I am immediately choking them to death. Because then I'd have this whole safe area that I don't have to worry about avoiding anyone for. Unfortunately, after you kind of get used to it, you find out that the AI is a little bit predictable. They usually follow very set paths. If they don't know how to open doors, walk through water, slide over things, or like jump down rails, all they will do is actually patrol in like a very, very tight area. And so I spent about an hour and a half not shooting, not sprinting, not opening doors or anything. I'd just wait for the lights to go out. Then I'd do that stuff and move through, and it kind of trivialized the game to the point where it wasn't fun anymore. But so the thing was, by the end of the game, they gave me enemies.
So is there like a campaign or something?
Yeah,
when you look at the screenshots, it looks like one room is the entire game because it's incomprehensible because it all looks the same location wise.
Unfortunately, it's this giant Victorian, almost Escher-looking palace with like a lot of weird railways and levels and stuff like that.
It looks like some sort of Matrix construct.
It
like an infinite
kind
room.
of is. The entire point of it is the thing is self-generating and is like, making itself bigger as you go through it. So it is going to look a little similar, but like each of the areas is kind of visually distinct, mostly by like tonality and some extra props. But there were definitely a couple of levels that were similar. In like the second and the fourth chapters, those were pretty close together. But once you get to the end, it's unique again. I don't know. It only felt repetitive once, but it's also like a 5-6 hour game, so it didn't have enough time to actually feel like a slog, which was good. But the end of the game, I actually have a clip on my announcements page if you guys want to watch it. You get enemies that learn on their own, and they figured out how to use an elevator. So specifically, I took an elevator up, and they called it back down while I was still on the elevator, so I then go back down, and there's 5 of them, and they mob me and rip me to shreds, and I'm just like, oh, that was bad. And the developer for that specific section of the game was watching it and taunting me the entire time, which was like huge dick move, but also kind of appreciated because that's always fun.
How weird is it to have the developers watching while you're playing a game?
Not uncommon. Which is fun. Unfortunately, I have this bad luck where they'll show up when I'm having like a really bad time, and they usually fix like whatever's giving me a bad time. Like I was having a problem with robot named Fight at one point, and the developer had not slept in like 2 or 3 days because his game was going up, and he was like doing last minute whatevers. And he sent me like this like really apologetic message on Twitter, and I'm just like, dude, I was in a bad place. Like, I was getting my ass kicked, and you've already fixed the glitch, so it's fine.
It's like when the developer of Wanderlust Adventures showed up to the stream when the game was just breaking.
I felt so bad about that.
We essentially skipped the final boss fight, didn't we? Because we did. It just didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah,
it just didn't happen, and the developer was watching the stream.
Yep.
I also had the experience of the developer of The Fall of the Dungeon Guardian show up to watch me as I was beating the game. So he was there for like 3 hours during my final chunk of the game. And boy, that was a game. I don't have the happiest things to say about that game. It was extra weird to have the developer show up.
It's worse when it's a developer of a game that like I can't say good things about. I had the developers of Immortal Planet show up, and I knew they were watching my series. But it was a Souls-like where you had to... So imagine if your Estus Flask only had 1 charge, and you charged it up by finding like temporary charges in like item containers. And so you had to run through the whole level again before you could try and take on the boss, because otherwise you wouldn't have enough Estus to take on Dark Eater Meteor. Like, how frustrating would that have been?
That sounds like a really unfortunate incentive system built into the game.
Yeah,
that's not even the worst part. Is the boss is so many. There's like 3 or 4 tiers for each boss, and each part has a different attack move.
Yeah, so every time it did the Lords of the Fallen thing, where every time you got it down a tier, it would get harder, and so I don't know. It was just,
or in the case of the final boss of Lords of the Fallen, accidentally easier.
Yeah, that was a really goofy fight. But like, this is a boss that I got 13 health charges. I walked into the boss fight and one-shot me. It stunned me on a damage pad as I entered the room, and I died with all of my stuff. And I'd spent like 10, 20 minutes getting all that stuff, so when it finally happened, I was just like, fuck this, I quit. And that was my last episode, and I was like, I know the developers are watching this, and I feel really bad, but at the same time, like, I can't just like suppress the just rage with that segment, because it was just like, this could have been a good game, but you forgot to make it fun.
Yeah, I got the impression, I played it for, I actually played it for a few hours, but on stream I played it for a little bit, and I got immediately the impression that it was, the way I put it was, it's a game for people who like hard games, but I think that's not the full picture. I think there's a lot of stuff there. I think it's about the fun, really.
Yeah, well, I totally understand enjoying games that are hard for the sake of being hard, but I'm getting kind of tired as a YouTuber of games that are hard for the sake of being hard, because generally you have to kind of like throw your face at them over and over and over again. And as a YouTuber, I can't afford that, because you lose 5 episodes in a row. Like, what do you do after a while? Keith, you were kind of talking about this when you were beating Bloodborne. Like, your last
the experience
couple
of like you have this much backlog of recording, and then you're stuck on a boss for X number of days or something. You're like, at some point, the next video has to come out, right? And like soon, like I'll run out of backlog of video, but I'm still stuck in the part of the game that I'm stuck on.
Yeah, and so that's usually what kills games for me that are like extra hard, because it's not worth it for me to play a game that, you know, I'm only
made that problem worse for myself, because I started playing games that are hard for a different reason. I decided to have a dedicated puzzle slot, and boy oh boy, every puzzle game I have, there's like a significant,
you get stuck on something.
Like every single episode is a percentage that is less than 100% of the actual recording that episode's made from. And I'm like, I'm just losing time, because you get stuck on all these moments of like either pure puzzle games where you're just like, okay, I've explained every element of the puzzle and I've looped around a few times. At this point, I just need to go quiet and just stare at this thing until something clicks for me. Or there's the adventure game problem of like, rub what on what exactly?
Yeah.
I haven't touched something to something. Like I'm playing Primordia, and there's a part where in order to progress, you need to take a rag and you need to rub it up in sticky grease to make it a sticky rag, and then give it to your floating robot friend to jam in the nostril of a robot so that it can't breathe through its nose so that its mouth opens.
Yeah, because if it's not sticky...
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
There's so many steps you have to go through there. I'm like... I'm like, the logical flow there is like, that you gotta... It takes a while to trace back even what was going on there.
The secret of the Monkey Island really did for all of us, really. Because that game just made it okay to be obtuse.
Chicken pulley.
But as far as the hard for hard's sake, that actually is what killed Dauntless in the end for me. Because, so it's been, I guess, almost a month since the game like became publicly available, buy-in, I guess. And the population dropped, Fortnite style, because it's an expensive buy-in to an incomplete game with, you know, bad, not fully like flushed out mechanics. So it's not exactly, you know, something that everybody's going to want to jump on. And so I started getting into the higher hunts, and it was just throwing me in solo because I couldn't find enough people for me to play through. But the game is balanced around playing with other people. And this is like, you know, 10, 15 hours in. So I was like, I could go back and like try and get you guys for it again, because I'd kind of given up on that because it was like a weird disconnect. And then I got to that point where I'm just like, it's not even worth it.
You invited us to play Dauntless, and then you were like, then you got salty on some level, but then you kept playing Dauntless, and it got confusing.
At that point, I was playing Dauntless out of an obligation. It kind of like how Scrap Mechanic after a while kind of became an obligation, where it's like, it's a fun game, but it's also like my best series right now, and I kind of have to keep playing it, even though it's like not something I want to do.
I feel so blessed that every game that does really well on my channel has an ending.
Yeah.
Like, I can't just like new game plus The Witness.
Yeah,
like, I solved it. It's over.
Every game that does well on my channel usually has no end. And that's a problem, or it can be redone in some alternate way to make it more interesting. You know, Fallout, Scrap Mechanic.
Yeah, for me
That's
the
also
biggest
a blessing,
one
I guess.
is for me the biggest one is just alternate runs of Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But those are kind of fun because there's also kind of an ending, and people like aren't going to just say like, okay, do another one next. After a while, people also get sick of those.
What were you saying a second ago, Colonel RPG?
I think that's also a blessing. I mean, I understand the pain of the need that people get for just more and more. But if you can, especially with Fallout 4 for you, Wonder, like you can always come back to it later. If you enjoy the game, you can always just get a new spin. And
I hate Bethesda so much. It is the shittiest company, and like everything they do is poison.
That went
what about
somewhere.
horse armor? You can't say that.
The new DLC thing. Like I love the idea of Fallout, Skyrim. All of the Bethesda games are generally actually really cool ideas that I'd love to play. But Bethesda, like the Pray for the Gods thing, the stupid paid mods thing, all of that is just like, I just want to stay away from that genre, that series, that publisher as much as possible. You know, I'll play their kind of like the games that they publish but aren't making in-house just because. Yeah, but even then I feel like guilty about it because like I felt bad about playing Prey because the fucking Pray for the Gods, like, but you can't have the word Prey in your game title and we're gonna sue you even though we don't have the right, but we got the money and you don't, so ha 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 ha.
You had to deal with a double whammy of that at one point because you were playing Prey and Persona 5 at the same time. They both have like this background darkness that tinges upon what is otherwise a Game of the Year contender.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Persona 5 is quite possibly one of the best JRPGs I've ever played, and, like, Atlas... The hilarious part is...
It's the second best reviewed Game of the Year, or third, but second if you don't count Mario Kart 8's re-release as being legit.
Yeah.
Just a port, that doesn't count. And don't forget the whole not giving access to... not giving review copies before release.
Oh yeah, but that's new approach is like, no game can be hurt by negative reviews now because we'll just not give out review copies for any of our games. They'll get them on release, so they have to like they have to do those review in progresses and stuff like that.
I hate those. That's part of the reason why like Shadow of War is so sketchy for me extra, because it's like they already have that like reputation for that, and then all the stuff leading up to it looks terrible too.
A review in progress is always really bad too, because often a lot of games give extra attention to the very beginning of a game. And like, was it like there's a Total War? I think it's Total War Shogun or some Total War game specifically became famous for being a game that starts off amazing, and most reviewers would stop within the margin of the amazing part and never realize how bad the game gets later on. Much like SimCity 2013 did.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happened to ReCore. A lot of people actually kind of liked ReCore because the first couple hours of it were great, and then it turned into this awful grind wall with the least interesting boss ever. Yeah, as the final ending, and like nobody knew about it.
Try to be aware of how when these things happen. Try to look past your fanboy goggles for that particular company and look at how they are very explicitly manipulating things in ways that are anti-consumer so they can make more money. Like that's like they're only hurting you. And it's worth looking at these things in that term.
I think all things considered, there's a lot of companies that do that. I as much of a bone as I have to pick with Bethesda myself, they're not the worst. But I remember having a talk about this on stream about Bethesda, and I gave something that actually I thought about later. I gave an example. I remember when Horse Armor, that I just mentioned, came out for Oblivion. That was the first DLC that came out. I think it came out very close to release as well, like a month or two.
I don't harbor any ill will for Horse Armor. It's just funny. But like that was like so early in DLC. Although to be fair, like Halo 2 came out like 2 or 3 years earlier and had DLC on the original Xbox. Yeah, and those were substantial expansion content where like every map pack was like several maps for $10 as opposed to
but that's
Horse Armor.
Yeah, like Diablo
the extra maps
had the same thing.
Honestly, the extra maps was a terrible idea just because it splits your player base. Like you never want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, if
they
you have a
actually
strong
had a
enough
clever way of handling that. So they'd make one playlist. They would make separate playlists for the DLC as they came out. But then when a few months later the next DLC came out, the previous DLC became free in Halo 2.
Ooh,
so over
I'm not sure
time,
if
every map pack actually became free over time. The only people that had to pay for it were offline only people that had to buy it in disc form to play with their friends locally. Because the maps actually had disc releases back then.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, but
weird.
they figured out DLC for console games in 2004 with Halo 2. So that is the one weird part about the horse armor. I'm like, no, there actually are examples of DLC when this came out.
The backlash for horse armor in particular, I think it was more in regards to how
it was
really
unreasonably
weird.
Priced. I think that was the main thing. It was like $5-6 for cosmetic armor for your horse. It's like, really?
I think it was $2 for the horse armor in particular. I might be wrong though.
It was funny watching society be like, "This will never take off," and then it took off like crazy. The cosmetic DLC.
I think the headlines at the time were that, as weird as it sounds right now, was that Oblivion was becoming...
it was only $2.50.
Oh, yeah, $2.50. As weird as it sounds right now, I think the main complaint that I remember hearing in the official forums and in news sites was that Oblivion was becoming pay to win, as it were, because the horse armor actually has an effect in game, and if you didn't buy that, you had a worse horse.
Meanwhile, as an Oblivion player, I was like, horses, no.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The horses just seemed like a nightmare.
Almost every open world video game actively becomes less fun the moment you try to use a horse in it. You're like, no, these controls, I don't want to.
The problem
it's not worth it.
The problem with Oblivion is that the horse was actually slower than the player if the player was fully maxed out. That was like,
because it had the Morrowind stats.
I just hate mounts in general because they're a pain to control. You might have to like babysit them so they don't die. And like in Breath of the Wild, for example, everybody was like going bananas over there, like getting a horse and like the fastest horse and like Ganon's horse or the Lord of the Forest.
I never used a horse.
Yeah, the game was so vertical. It's like, what's the point of this?
The game about climbing and gliding, and they're like, "Here's a horse. By the way, it can't teleport to you when you summon it." I'm like, oh, so if it doesn't have the Witcher / Dynasty Warriors powers, then and it's only a thing that you can only call when it's nearby, it's gonna get abandoned immediately every time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I had the same problem in Horizon Zero Dawn. It's like, you can ride like the robots, and it's like, no, you can only ride a couple of them, and they die almost instantly the moment you get into combat because they try and help.
That mechanic existed.
Yeah, so I'd use it. What I would do is I would hop on one and get as many fast travel points as possible, and then forget about it for the rest of the game.
That's the thing. I wasn't sure what the use case was in Horizon, because in every fight ever, you have an advantage if you start off in stealth, which means you don't want to be mounted. And if you're traveling around, you get fast travel points, so you probably already can travel faster by just sitting through a loading screen than trying to find a mount that you can't even call because it's not yours, and then bring it over and so on. It's one of those features where I didn't know why it was there.
It probably was just somebody who had the idea, and the boss is just, oh no, that has to be in the game because everybody's going to want that. And it might even have been marketed as well.
It's like, it was like how in once you get past the first 2 Assassin's Creed games, every Assassin's Creed game has what essentially feels like that game's module. Like, here's some weird additional mechanic that kind of interacts with the core formula but is not at all mandatory, and there's like a tutorial at one point, but you can basically just ignore the mechanic the entire playthrough because of how optional it is.
Yep.
And then they oftentimes forget about that mechanic in the very next game. Like, Revelations is like, you can craft bombs now. Like, it's like Shovel Knight, Plague of Shadows or something. Like, it's like, mix this thing with that thing to make a different kind of bomb. And I'm like, I'm just going to stab everybody like I did in the other 4 games.
Exactly.
Why do I want to craft bombs? And then I just didn't craft bombs the entire playthrough and got 100% completionism of the game. I'm like, I don't know what that was for. All right, bye.
Yep. It's, what I was going to say about the horse armor DLC, though, I remember it stuck to my mind what Bethesda said about like their justification for that DLC, because they never actually apologized for it or anything, because it was just their thing.
No,
that's not what they do.
What they said was that they were experimenting with the market, seeing what works and what doesn't, and I think that's very telling of what they're doing. They're just trying to maximize profit.
Yeah,
since 2005.
Have you ever actually looked at who's on the Bethesda board of directors?
Well, ZeniMax or
Have
Bethesda?
you ever even heard about it? I think it's kind of the same thing. But ZeniMax is like the parent-ish.
Yeah.
It's like there are a couple of politicians in there. It's like business moguls. There are like a bunch of people. Yeah, I think it was Donald Trump's son was one of them and stuff
Robert
like that. And
Trump?
I'm like, I don't want to get too into politics and stuff, but like when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's scary, because like I have never heard of him being a video game fan, and like I understand business has to be business on some level, but like it always scares me when like I hear about Ubisoft getting picked up of Vivendi, which doesn't really care about what games are made as long as profits happen.
Yep.
And like Vivendi did horrible things to Blizzard and Activision for a while, and they managed to crawl their way out of that hole. Yeah, but like I get scared when I hear about like cool developers being under control by people that probably don't give a shit about video games. It's like, but if you don't give a shit about video games, the quality of the market drops off in favor of quick bucks, and then that goes in bad places.
That's how the ET landfill happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like that actually caused video games in North America to stop being made for the most part for like a decade.
Or you have
absolutely sorry. I'm sorry.
I was just thinking about like, was it 38 Studios, which is like a football player gets a grant from the government to make a video game company, then the grant's rescinded when it's not profitable enough and the whole thing goes under. Like once really weird third parties get involved, the whole thing stops being about making good games.
Yeah, and the worst part is like nobody can even pick up Amler really, because Rhode Island angrily owns the product now.
I like that you're saying they specifically angrily own it.
Well, yeah, like so I lived in Massachusetts at the time.
Like
it was on the news.
Konami.
They're really upset about it, but they're not going to sell it.
The governor came out and condemned like people in relation to the product because
oh my god.
The general consensus was they got robbed. Which they kind of did, they kind of didn't. They really should not have picked
that was a weird choice.
He was a baseball player, not a football guy.
That's the thing.
I mixed it up.
Yeah,
I knew the studio was his number.
Yeah. That was almost an okay thing. Kingdoms of Amalur is actually like a half decent game. It just came out at a terrible time, and it was way too bloated for its own good. Because I actually rather enjoyed the combat and like the world. It's just like, you know what was a great game? Dragon Age. But like, let's add some action combat. And then just MMO side quests, because really we want to make an MMO, but we don't have the money for that. So let's make the normal game first, and then immediately dive into making an MMO, even though we probably don't have the budget for it, even with like a Western action RPG's profits. It was dumb.
Where were you going a second ago, Colonel?
I was remembering reading online or somebody telling me about, I don't know what perception they had of anything, but that the crash of was it 83 or 93?
Video game crash.
I think it was 93.
1983.
83, okay.
It'd have to be the oldies, because by the time I was born, and that was like when the Super Nintendo was happening in the early 90s.
Yeah. That wasn't
really a video game crash.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. But I've read online people that are not, well, they don't think that crash happened. And you just really need to look at some numbers. I mean, I didn't understand their argument at all, because you just need to look at the numbers. Only recently are we actually getting back to the money that was being invested back then. And it's crazy, because we see how much money is invested in games these days. And back then it was, I mean, the arcades did have a bunch of money as well invested, not just video games. But the billions and billions got dropped down to less than 1 billion in investment in the space of 2 years, because of the same stuff that happens in these days. But of course,
because the first time around it was a bubble that popped hard.
Yeah,
They're like, oh, this is going to go places. Let's put all our money in it, like, short-sightedly. And then it was like, oh, no, we've made what will later be called a, crap, what's the name of the U-Draw company?
Yeah, it's like the wasn't that the
THQ.
Yeah,
like,
THQ.
essentially, everyone in the 80s pulled the THQ at the same time.
Yeah.
And then the entire industry failed.
Except THQ kind of wasn't lucky, just they weren't really skeevy, I guess.
Yeah, they gambled and lost it all. I don't know. I'm really glad that Darksiders is being worked on again and Battle Chasers is getting made. Have you guys ever played any of the Darksiders games or no?
I think I have both. That's so Darksiders 1 and 2, right?
Darksiders was like the war
God of War
death.
Zelda mashup.
Yeah.
Oh no,
I got bored in the first one and just kind of stopped. I think I reached a part where you run around on a horse in an arena at one point, and
there's a big old sandworm.
Over the course of that game, I felt like I just wasn't engaged in its combat at all, and I just kind of petered off and stopped.
I personally loved it, but I think part of it is, like, as an artist, Darksiders has one of the best visual styles when they actually, like, tried. The problem is Darksiders 1 had a terrible setting, but really, like, kind of tighter design flow. And then Darksiders 2 had a much better setting, but they went Diablo with it and, like, added loot treadmills and
so they made that formula didn't need it all, because the first game the first game was clearly trying to be Zelda.
Yeah,
and the second game
Zelda
was like,
God
what
of
if
War
loot?
kind of it couldn't decide if it wanted to be Zelda or God of War, and I actually thought it was kind of compelling because I never really liked Zelda combat that much. I still don't like it. I tolerate it because it's okay.
I guess we could talk about that, actually, is that I'm playing Ocarina of Time for the first time right now.
Yeah. Like...
that's your reaction?
Or mixed responses.
Zelda combat would be great if it incorporated a couple more, like, Soulsy mechanics. Like, just a little bit here and there. Because... I like the idea of the combat, and it was, like, kind of the first Soulsy style. But the enemies just never felt... tight. Well, I don't know. You talk about it. I'll formulate my thoughts.
What, just the Zelda combat, basically?
Yeah.
There's a weirdness to it. So I haven't played any of the intermediate Zelda games at all. I played Breath of the Wild, which I actually think has interesting combat in some ways, mostly because of the sheer number of options you get to screw around with during fights. So, like, it's really amusing to be like, oh, there's an enemy camp. I'm going to hang glide over them and drop bombs on them, then land in the middle of them with a plunging attack from an attack that does an AoE lightning spell or something. And, like, you can do all these weird tricks along the way, and you can approach it how you want to, much like you would in, like, Metal Gear Solid 5.
I agree with you 100% on that. The only thing I didn't like about it is in, like, a direct combat with somebody else, they always felt like they had way too much HP. And I got really bored of, like, spending 2 weapons on, like, a white moblin. I'm like, I like Souls because...
I mostly just avoided major enemies most of the time until it was actually a boss.
Oh, see, I was very committed to trying to max out all of my equipment, and, like, some of them involved fighting a bunch of those... What are the centaur guys called again?
The Lionels.
Yeah,
which everyone got on me for, because I was like, these haven't been in a Zelda game before, have they? Apparently they're from the first one. Apparently they're from the first Zelda game ever. There was Lionels.
But so for me, the Lionels were kind of a neat thing. But after the first one, which is the weakest one, and I, like, burnt through most of my weapons on, it's like, no, if I want to fight any Lionel, I have to, like, farm up a bunch of weapons and food just to be able to fight this thing, because it's just such a long fight. And I'm like, just cut it down or make it drop more or something, because, like, I don't want to farm on an enemy. That's no fun.
I just avoided that because I knew it was going to be a dark place to go down, basically.
Yeah.
But for Breath of the Wild, you can compare that to other games that have combat in them. Yeah. But when I play Ocarina of Time, speaking specifically about the combat, I think it's honestly most fair to compare it to, like, Rareware games, like Banjo-Kazooie.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not... Like, the actual combat itself... Like, I think the more I play this game, the more I still will support the argument that people often disagree with, that I do think Zelda actually is an RPG, at least in video game terms. Like, I'll often dispute the idea of whether or not RPGs are RPGs in video games, because I'm like, you don't role play in these games. What the hell? But if in the umbrella of what we consider RPGs to be in video games and the agreed upon global definition, I still think games like Ocarina of Time are RPGs. They have all the same systems overall. But as far as gameplay goes, yeah, it is, especially the combat, and especially against bosses or even like even regular enemies, it often feels more like Banjo-Kazooie than anything else. Like, it's a very simplistic combat system, and often, like, a very specific thing will be like the weakness of each enemy, like some sort of, like, I do the butt pound and they fall over, but except it's like I throw the Deku Nut. And the boss fights are always like, here's the gimmick, and you have to beat the gimmick. Like, there's a fight where Ganon is coming out of a bunch of different paintings that are all around a room.
That fight scared the shit out of me. That's actually what killed Ocarina of Time for me as a kid, because I couldn't deal with him coming from the mirrors, because Ganon already was a scary concept for, 11-year-old me.
And weird, so, like, long face.
Add multiple Ganons on a horse coming from nowhere. I, like, handed the controller to my brother, and I'm like, you do it. I'm leaving the room.
Yeah, when I look at the fight of Ganon coming out of two mirrors at once, or two paintings at once, and one of them's the fake one of them's the real one, and you got to hit him before he does the lightning attack, and you do that 3 times, and all that stuff that's going on there, the moment I hit that especially, I was like, yeah, this isn't like Dark Souls or Darksiders or God of War or any combat-oriented game. This is like a Gruntilda fight. Like, you walk around and press the button at the right time to defeat its weak point, and then you move on, basically. And it's like, so I find myself wanting to recontextualize the game because of that. Like, not like the combat level, all the combat decisions are definitely more Nintendo 64 platformer oriented, as opposed to like guy with sword oriented, like the way you assume a game will be like when you're playing with the sword. And I don't have an issue with that, because I loved those kinds of games back then too. But it's definitely a shock moment when you realize that's what the game is.
I wish.
Didn't the original Zelda team also weren't they the Marrow team as well?
Probably.
I don't know. So
I don't know how big the team was in Nintendo in 64 era to begin with.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the original Mario, I understand. I misunderstood what you're saying. Sorry, because I was still trying to process what you say, and I agree with you that has a lot of the trappings of what makes an RPG, especially on the Japanese side of things.
Oh yeah,
computer RPG,
JRPGs, which are games where you don't role play anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I definitely agree with you on when you call into question whether computer RPGs can be role playing games. But I was trying to process that, but because I've heard that, but for some reason I was thinking, but weren't they the same? And I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to find online if they are the same team as the Mario one, but I can't figure that one out.
I know that Miyamoto's cited as the origin for Mario and Pikmin and Zelda. Like, there's always the story about like what real life experience inspired the entire series, basically.
Yeah.
Be it gardening or like going around in caves and exploring as a kid, and wanted to replicate that as in a video game experience.
Oh yeah, it's Miyamoto, who created both the series. So yeah, that's probably where I'm thinking.
So the same lead designer, at least at that point, I think. In Ocarina, it's interesting. On some level, I like that they essentially have merged the two concepts back then, because like they've essentially, like, it's full of side quests the way that you expect RPGs to be full of side quests, but those side quests are more akin to the weird random quirk stuff that shows up in like a Mario 64 or a Banjo-Kazooie, where a weird interaction with a snowman will result in you getting like that level's star or whatever, but in this case it'd be like a heart container and stuff like that, and that'll be part of the RPG progression as opposed to level progression.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's basically what they did, is they took that way that platformers would handle like weird interactions that lead to you getting like rupee, and I mean what would lead to you getting like the progression thing, like a jiggy, and they'd replace that with it being optional things that you can do to get the things that progress Link so that he can become more powerful for the mandatory content, which is the dungeons. Main complaints I have about the game, which I really don't have that much to complain about. It's mostly just a little bit of shock of realizing what it is to some extent. But the main complaints I have is Z targeting is ass. Like Z targeting is genuinely garbage. And there's moments where there's platforming moments in the game, and every now and then you'll get a little bit frustrated with the fact that you can't jump in that game. Because in Ocarina of Time, you run at ledges and he auto jumps. And so that'd be perfect if the game always had gaps that are the same width apart, so you will always make the jump. But like I got to the beginning of the forest temple, and there's 2 trees. You have to jump from tree branch to get to a key that's required to beat that dungeon. And if you just jump from branch to branch, you'll either undershoot or overshoot the branch over and over again. So you have to get a really specific angle. And it really all boils down to, like, the whole reason you're having that problem is because you can't just press a jump button and actually control your jump arc. So you have to, like, figure out, you have to essentially, like, put out a measuring stick of, like, what angle do I have to be to make the jump exactly 5 feet? Because that's how far we'll jump no matter what. And it's very frustrating. And it doesn't come up too much, thankfully. But Z targeting is incredibly frustrating when you're used to games where you can just face an enemy and just press it, you like turn the camera towards an enemy or whatever and just click a stick and it just works. Z targeting in Ocarina of Time specifically, you have to just wait for Navi to just decide to float by a particular enemy and then press the target button, and then it'll make you target that enemy. And
I forgot about that.
Yeah, Navi determines whether or not you can Z target people, and the way that what controls that is really not super certain. And I think that if you're used to the game, it's much like the issue with Sonic Mania and people freaking out about me not knowing certain things. Like if you play this as a child obsessively, you probably have like a muscle memory for how exactly to like coax all of Navi's behaviors. But as somebody that's just playing it for the first time now, I'm like, what is wrong with you, Navi? And also, why does Navi determine who I can Z target onto? Because I've played lock-on targeting games for 10 years now, so I'm like, what? So it's a problem that's been fixed in the meantime. So going back to when it wasn't fixed yet is like, it's interesting that someone thought this was a good idea at some point. It's not a game-breaking giant problem, but there's definitely moments of like, just lock, no, I'm trying to fight the Liz, no. And you're trying to fight the Lizalfos and you're pressing the Z target button and it's just making the camera center behind Link instead of locking onto the enemy. You're like, no, I'm trying to fight him.
I had that problem with Bongo Bongo because I'd be trying to like shoot him and then suddenly Navi would like whiz across the screen to target somebody else and be like, no, I can't. Yeah. I have to.
Like at some point, if you're fighting one dude one-on-one, the game might as well just enter battle camera now and just do it. Like some games actually did back then or even do recently. Like some games are like, you're in combat now, here's the combat camera. But Zelda asks you to initiate combat by actively pressing the Z target button on an enemy, but then also won't give that the priority it should have when you're clearly in combat and pressing the Z target button. It thinks that the top priority should be centering behind you. And like that's also a problem that Dark Souls still has, but way less. Like Dark Souls,
it's easier to go around it, I guess.
Yeah, if an enemy's right next to you in Dark Souls, you're not going to like somehow fail to lock onto them. But they're like, I'm playing Dark Souls 1 with Andrew right now, and he's tearing his hair out because you'll have boss fights where the boss chamber is bigger than the lock-on range. And so he's living the experience that a lot of us Dark Souls players have just learned to work around over time, which is when the enemy breaks your lock-on range, and then you have to deal with like them approaching you from the distance, but every time you click, and you're trying to kind of run away from them, but every time you click the stick, it's locking the camera behind you instead of going to the boss because for some reason you can't lock onto that range. Which it's one of those problems that silently went away. Like when you get to Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, there's like giant arenas where it auto locks, and like
that's good.
Like was it? You remember Dark Souls? Like you remember Dark Eater Meteor Wander?
Yeah,
like that's one of the biggest boss arenas ever made in a Dark Souls game. And you'll note, like in the background, you probably didn't even notice it because it was just intuitive. But you would hit lock on from like hundreds of feet away, and it would work, which isn't true for the rest of the game, because they started to actually change mechanics of the game for boss fights, and it was really smooth and intuitive and smart. The camera would pan away from your character to a further distance so you can see the boss better, and the lock on range would like multiply. Unfortunately, they never patched that into Dark Souls 1.
They never did.
No, it just makes the ONS fight worse.
Though Dark Souls 1 was definitively like easier now that I've done all of them.
Oh yeah,
I think so
like,
as well.
When Bird and I did, I mean, Effectively, I started with 1, but I never finished it. I beat 2 on my own, but never the DLC. Played 2 with Bird, and then 3 with everybody, and then we went back to play 1, just Bird and myself, and we just rolled it, save for like a couple of weird bits and like problems, and just like the differences between all of them. But going back to 1, apart from the technical problems, that game is actually rather easy compared compared to everything else.
It's a game known for being brutally difficult that in hindsight, after playing all 5 games, almost becomes quaint.
Yes. It was relaxing. Except for the PvP invaders, because they suck more there than anywhere else.
They've had a lot of time to get better at sucking.
Yeah, like we had just gotten
inside. It's been 6 years, motherfucker.
We had finally got into Castle Lordran or whatever it was, and you know that room with the bonfire with Solaire? And he's like just sitting there waiting for you. You can get invaded while sitting at the bonfire right there. And apparently that place has like shitty co-op things, so like Bird was almost never able to connect to me. We just had some guy invading us over and over and over again, to the point where I just turned on invincibility and said, fuck it. I just want to beat Ornstein and Smo and get out of here, because this place sucks to begin with. And it was not pleasant. Whereas like 2, we got invaded a couple of times. It was like, okay, this is fine.
Yeah.
I played a... Sorry.
I was just saying it's probably about time to close up. Do you have any last thing you want to get in, Colonel RPG, before we close it off?
I just wanted to. I played a little bit. Say a little bit about Dark Souls 2. I played a little bit of it, probably until the first boss. It was about that, and it's noticeably harder. I do have the Scholar of the Dark Sin or something like that, so that might have been the reason. I have both versions though.
Scholar of the Dark Sin is noticeably harder.
Okay.
Noticeably harder, especially in the early game when you're going to feel it the most. It was essentially meant to be like you can almost think of Scholar of the First Sin as like being like Master Quest for Dark Souls 2. Like it is a remix of the game fundamentally. Like the entire level design change is identical. Like the layouts are the same, but they swap out enemy layouts massively.
Spots. Yeah.
So that's the reason then. Okay.
Yeah. Like, to the point where, like, I would recommend to anyone, if they have access to it, to play Dark Souls 2 Vanilla. And then if you still like Dark Souls 2 and like the idea of a remixed version, then you have a lot of options, because Dark Souls 2 New Game Plus remixes the enemies, Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin remixes the enemies, and Scholar of the First Sin New Game Plus remixes the enemies again. So there are actually 4 different enemy layouts you can play through for that game, which is not true for any other Dark Souls game.
I think the problem is Dark Souls 2 regular is no longer available, period. I don't think you can get it anywhere.
No, I think it is. I bought it.
Is it?
At least.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
I forgot.
I think you can still get it. It's just that they offer like an upgrade to the DX11.
Well, actually, apparently what it is Dark Souls 2 never goes on sale. Scholar of the First Sin will go down to like 10, 20 bucks.
It's
Dark Souls 2 is always 40. Yeah.
And even if it wasn't for that, you could get Dark Souls 2 for Xbox 360 and PS3, because Scholar never came out on those.
Yeah.
But
I think the other problem is Scholar of the First Sin includes all the DLC, whereas Dark Souls 2, you still have to buy the $30 season pass.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Yeah. But I think Dark Souls 2, the original one, did go on sale this summer, because that's when I bought it. I think I bought the Scholar of the First Sin and Dark Souls 2 as well. But I don't know. It's just, if you look for Dark Souls 2, you get the Scholar of the First Sin first, and it's just what Steam pushes, I think.
Yeah, it's what they push. They kind of treat it like the definitive thing. I think it's just that they have to, logistically, because it's the new one, they have to act like it's the important one. But boy, oh boy, is it not a recommended way to first experience that game.
No, it is hard.
It's essentially with challenge mode turned on, except there's no setting. It's just what the game is. It's a weird choice, but if you were somebody who actually played Dark Souls 2 and liked it, then having a remix version was a welcome addition. But as an outsider experience, it's so confusing and weird.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, for sure.
They actually made it more confusing by they put out a product called Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin on PS3 and 360. That was just a Game of the Year edition of Dark Souls 2. So it was the same So what it had is it was the normal Dark Souls 2 with all of its DLC bundled together, but called Scholar of the First Sin on the box, but it didn't have the new enemy layout. So people would look it up. People playing that version, the 360 PS3 version, would look up my playthrough of Scholar of the First Sin and then complain about how it's different. And I'm like, that's because the name on your box is kind of a lie.
Yeah, it's just a giveaway.
It's the weirdest thing. All right, so I think we're going to close it out here. Thanks for coming, everybody. This is Save the Universe Podcast, episode 40. If you want to find Colonel RPG, you can search Colonel RPG on YouTube. That's the military ranking, not like popcorn or anything. You can send your questions to FourNerdsQuestions@gmail.com. We didn't answer any this time or last time, really, mostly because Bird's not here, and you guys ask a lot of questions to either all of us or even specifically to Bird, so we wait for when everyone's around and then hopefully remember when everyone's around.
Yes.
Thanks for watching like always, guys, and I'll see you next time.